Hey everyone, welcome to episode number 72 of the Avocado Gamescast. We thought we'd take it easy this week before we record our big year-end extravaganza that we record every year. So today it's just me and Kappa, and we're going to be chatting about the games that influenced us. How are you doing, Kappa?
I'm good. I'm definitely excited to kind of wind down the holidays. Kind of feels like this year's been a weird one. So, but yeah, uh, excited to kind of get this one done. We've been talking about it for a while, so feels good to actually record it.
Yeah, we've always been talking about how we can talk about our tastes in games more. I think we spend a lot of time talking about stuff we don't like,
Right. Yeah.
or stuff that is kind of not relevant to us, but that is happening in the industry. And we do want to keep covering the industry, but today just we want to kind of take a break from that and talk about how we got to where we are
Right.
in the gaming sphere. Uh, but like before we get to that, I guess we should talk about what we've been playing lately.
Yeah.
Kappa, what have you been playing?
I mean, I guess so. I did get my Xbox Series X, which is gonna take me a while to just remember how to say it. Like the name of it.
Yeah,
It's just always it's not a good name.
it's not
There's
great nomenclature.
too
Yeah,
many X's and series and versions and stuff like that. But I got it, like I've been talking about, more for Game Pass than for anything else. And this is kind of like my media center now for my office. So I had to pick up a game just to play, and I went with Valhalla, AC Valhalla, kind of just out of like an abundance of like I know the series, I'm comfortable
yeah.
with it. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. So I
I
didn't
mean,
feel
it
like
was one of the two big launch titles, right? The
yeah,
other one being
exactly.
what I'm going to talk about later.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So, I mean, I kind of picked the one that I'm a little bit more familiar with and thought, okay, well, at least I'll be able to jump into this game world and stuff like that. And it's been an oddly rocky launch on the Xbox for old Valhalla. It seems like maybe they kind of got it out a little bit. There's been a new patch that came out, I think, yesterday that kind of fixed a lot of the weird issues. Some of it was like very technical stuff, like real bad screen tearing and stuff like that. That I don't think many people, past people looking just for graphical digs on the system. It's a launch title; it's gonna have stuff like that, right? So that kind of stuff I wasn't too concerned about. But the thing I've been noticing kind of more than anything with this newest one is that like it's weird to me. Like I don't think developers mean to, like insert bugs or anything, but this feels like such a buggy release in some ways. Um, just like outside of like technical stuff, which I get, but like in some ways the stuff that I've been seeing just doesn't make sense. One of the biggest things that's annoying me right now about it is Assassin's Creed kind of has this very typical autosave function, right?
yeah.
Games with this like kind of level of collectibles need to have this nailed down, right? Like, because you don't want to get a collectible and then lose the autosave and have to go back and do it all over again, right? Um, Assassin's Creed Valhalla has me doing that a fair share, and it's very frustrating to pick something up and then have to go back and do it all over again. Um, there's a lot of collectibles in this game, like every Assassin's Creed or any
So
other type of game.
it's not auto saving after every collectible pickup.
Not consistently,
That's
and
weird.
that's what I'm finding very, because that's something that the series has had nailed down forever. You know what I mean? So it's weird to see this kind of come along, I guess, as something that it feels new, right? Um, and it's kind of frustrating when you go climb this giant mountain, uh, only to find out minutes later that the thing that you went up there to collect and then fell off the giant mountain getting, now you have to go back up there again. To compound it, they put a lot of stuff on some of the collectible server side, which is kind of weird, right? So server side meaning when I collect an opal in the game, right?
Yeah.
That's a server side item because it's kind of their premium in-game currency. So now when I collect it, if I die and then I load a different save, the icon for that opal shows up on my map, but I can't collect it again. It's just sitting there, you know? So little weird stuff like that, I kind of think has been some of like, maybe it's the technological changes or I don't know. I don't know enough about why, but it feels weird to have to deal with some of those bugs in an Assassin's Creed game when the series has kind of gotten to a point now where I feel like, I don't want to say stale, but it's gotten a lot better lately. in the RPG aspect, that it feels weird that I'm dealing with these kind of bugs all of a sudden again.
It's
Um,
it's really strange because it seems like once they've got the formula down and they have the old saving code from
right.
a previous game that they could reuse, it's on the same engine as Odyssey and
Yeah, I
Origins,
think
right?
this one's a little bit different. I think they've
Okay.
switched to something they're calling Anvil. The game looks very good. It's a gorgeous looking game. I think it helps that Norway is a little bit more stunning, or like visually, there than maybe some of the other Assassin's Creed games have been in the past.
Yeah.
So I mean, it looks very good. And when you're climbing these huge mountains above these fjords and stuff, it looks very clean and nice. And so I think part of that helps it. But the game kind of rapidly puts you into England, and then it's kind of, I don't want to say murky, but it's that kind of oversaturated, like almost like painting quality that they kind of found, I think, around the time of Assassin's Creed 3, I guess, when you start running the woods of America. I think it kind of feels more like that. So
Yeah.
that kind of palette has come back. Gameplay's all there. It's right off of Odyssey. They've kind of streamlined. I don't want to call it the Shadow of War copy that they had going on with the mercenaries. They kind of streamlined some of that, so now you're not facing hordes of mercenaries. There's kind of a specific mercenary per area. The thing that I've really liked, and I've been a sucker for this thing or this
Yeah.
type of gameplay forever, which is you build a city up. Ever since Breath of the Wild, not Breath of the Wild, Breath of Fire,
Yeah.
the old RPG where it had you build a city, right? And you're like building houses for people and inviting different people to your city. And like it just seems so natural in an RPG when you meet these like shiftless characters who don't have good motivations or whatever. You're like, hey, I'm building a town. Why don't you show up?
Yeah. Come hang out with me at my
Yeah,
camp, and then
exactly.
you build it
So
up.
you can sell me fish, I really like that idea. And I think it's something where like if you introduce kind of a cool one-off character, which Assassin's Creed does a lot now. If you think about where the series is kind of going, you're meeting a lot of characters that kind of just pop into your world, and then that's it. About Valhalla's kind of got like an idea of like building a new home. That's kind of like the series theme,
Yeah.
going around it. So it's cool that you're doing that kind of literally and figuratively throughout the game, like finding a new home in England for your clan, but at the same time, finding literal homes for people as you kind of push around. So I like that aspect of it. Vikings are hard, right? Like I feel like Vikings and pirates and some of the, I don't know, seedier maybe like elements of historical fiction can get kind of, I don't know, like you're messing with a group of people who were kind of famous for like going to areas, stealing everything, raping everything, burning down a village, and then leaving. That's not like So
And they're kind of sanitizing it a little bit
Right,
for
yeah,
the game,
yeah.
and like I expect them to do that, but it's weird for a series that has generally not strayed away from like depicting historical realities. I mean, obviously they fictionalize everything, but I think it's the first time they've really just completely reframed
Right.
one historical
Like the
group.
historical aspect of it. Yeah, and it feels stretched in some places. The way they get around it, I don't think this is a spoiler, but the way they kind of get around it is they really expand the idea that, hey, the Order, aka the Templars, has really sunk its claws in at every institutional level in England, from the church to the king to so the idea is less that you're not invading these people's poor lives, that you're freeing them almost from the grips of this very weird England that they've got kind of going on, right?
That's
which
still a little suspect.
Right. Yeah, it's like you're kind of like, ugh, I don't know. It doesn't really get it right in a way, but
Yeah.
it feels a little bit cleaner that like, okay, I'm not taking over this town because I'm just a jerk who wants to take over this town, which I am. I mean, I need supplies and they got them, so I'm going there. But, they kind of, if you go through it and read these little logs and things like that in the stages, they definitely kind of try to kind of shade some of it over with, well, that was actually a village controlled by a corrupt priest who was part of the Order. So honestly, you probably did them a favor. So,
I feel like it would have been almost braver and more interesting to just straight up have you play as kind of a villain.
Yeah, Yeah, and I thought that was the direction they were going to go right at first, but then they kind of back off of it. Um, there's a lot of new mechanics that I really like. One of them that comes back in is, I don't know if you've ever played Dragon's Dogma. Um,
No, but I've heard of. Well,
so
I've been meaning to play it, I
yeah,
should
I
say.
can't remember what they're called, shades or something like that. But the idea is that players create a secondary character, right? It's not your
Yeah.
main character, and it's a helper. And then other people can basically pull this shade into their world and use them, for their own world. Assassin's Creed, smartly, because they had never seen a system they won't copy that kind of works. Copy that system, and that Dragon's Dogma games, that's pretty old at this point. So the idea now is that you basically create kind of like I don't remember what they're called, Yorm Viking or something. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But the idea there being that you pull this Viking in and other people can basically incorporate that into their world. And whenever somebody does that, you get silver in your world whenever somebody kind of uses your Viking. As far as I can tell, it's pretty much just based on cosmetics, right? So like you'll see like this giant dude or like, like this very kind of like almost like fashion model Viking, kind of set up like in your camp, and sometimes you'll agree, sometimes you won't. But um, the idea being that's another kind of like system that I feel like they've incorporated kind of well in this case. It's not fully realized, but um, I think the one thing I've got to also talk about is there's this crazy bug right now where children in this game become giants. It's the funniest bug in the world. I
That's
know they're going to
amazing.
patch it eventually,
You
but I'm
got you
sure
got to see screenshots of this.
yeah, I'm sure you can see YouTube videos about it, but I don't know what happens. But it's like the children start to run in place, and then they start to run, but it's almost like they're moonwalking forward. Like their feet aren't like, it's like how you would run in a dream almost, right? Like their feet are hauling ass, but they're kind of like skipping along because their model has become a giant, but they're still a little kid. So like they move at the pace a little kid would, but it's one of the funniest bugs I've ever seen. But it has me rolling every time I see it. I'm assuming it's something with frames and frame locks and something like that being upscaled, but it's about the funniest shit I've ever seen. So.
I can't even imagine how that would happen. Like the
Yeah.
model just like grows relative to the world.
Yeah. I mean, like, so the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, look, this guy's a pretty tall guy. Because your player characters, I mean, I'm playing the female version of Ivor, is still a pretty tall and beefy character, just because the player characters tend to have that kind of model.
Yeah,
so they
you
stand
need them
out
to
a
be
little.
imposing. Yeah.
Right. And then so I was running through town, my town, and I saw this, like, I thought it was like a literal giant. I was like, this character's like a full 2 or 3 feet taller than me, kind of skipping through the middle of my town. And then I go talk to the character. I'm like, oh, it's the child that I had just talked to in the previous mission. And then I kind of went online and looked, and I was like, yep, sure as shit, it is a bug. There's a lot of funny stuff. I think that one of the things that Assassin's Creed is kind of seeing just as a series is as they're going open world historical RPG, they're running into a lot of those weird bugs that I think typically Bethesda like was kind of known for or experience, right? Because it's just hard to do. Like I give open world games like a pretty like a wide range of like, okay, it's okay that this stuff happens because you're not trying to just tell like one simple story on a rail like other games are, where you go to here and this is the angle that your character looks at this and this. When you're trying to do all this open world stuff, it's
It's really hard to account for everything the player might do in it.
yeah, it's the Godfather versus like a one room stage play. Do you know what I mean? Like when you go see a play and it takes place in one room and you're like, all right, I got this. Like cool, they've got some good set design, but like when you're trying to do 5,000 moving pieces and having characters interact and online drop in drop out components and stuff, like that's when shit tends to get broke, right? And I mean, so stuff like that I laugh at it, but there is always that weird angle of like, what are they, literally unplayable, of like some of this stuff, but I'm enjoying it.
It really depends. I mean,
Right.
I give more leeway to open world games, but some are just so broken that
Right.
they do become unplayable. Like I've talked about my experiences with Oblivion and how it's still broken. Like you
Right.
can't complete certain quests in that game.
Yeah.
And like as long as you're not you have to be above that level, I think. And
Right,
as long
right.
as
Playable, but
as long as it's not that bad, I think it's fine. You don't want what like happened to Unity,
Right.
where
Yeah.
that game came out with spectacular bugs,
Hmm.
and it kind of ruined the series' reputation for a while.
Right. I'd say this one is on that cusp, but I think my forgiveness factor, some of it comes from the fact, okay, new console gen, they're developing for some stuff, like maybe there's some of that going on. Launch games are kind of buggy out the gate, and it seems like this patch has fixed 85% of the weird bugs that I've seen. I think kind of where I'm a little bit more annoyed with where Assassin's Creed is going is maybe some of the persistent loot, I guess, that I'm seeing. Like the idea that like you'll play half the game in like maybe 3 or 4 armor sets, right? There's not as much like constant upgrading as there was in Origin and Odyssey. It seems like the loot is very few and far between, which makes sense, right? But it's better designed overall, and kind of more on theme with what your character is, right? So like if you're trying to be a hunter that uses the bow, your build, your skills, and the what you wear kind of all reflect that. But it kind of takes the fun out of the moment to moment type stuff, knowing I'm not going to find a cool new sword or a cool, you know what I mean? Um, Whereas I had kind of the opposite problem. This one kind of, I would say that in Odyssey, I was almost getting too much loot, and I wasn't really understanding the difference between this axe versus this sword that kind of seemingly did the same thing, right? Um,
Right, and then it like sometimes those little, like minute trade offs, like do I want like slightly higher speed of attack for slightly less
right.
damage? It almost becomes irrelevant.
Yeah, and this game it does that as with runes. I mean, runes time honored, RPG tradition of rune slotting, right? But it's like I don't know what 0.13% to dodge. Why is that better than 0.3% health? I mean, it is literally 0.3%. Like I'm not making that up. Like there's a lot of these runes that are, I don't sure,
Like
like
why even bother equipping it at that point?
right, right. The one thing I will say too, gorgeous world. Every mini game you can almost imagine feels like it makes. They got fishing, they got a dice game, they've got a drinking game, they've got battle rapping. I think it's called flighting. I have no idea if that's a historical thing or not, or if it's something they just kind of put in there. But it is battle rapping. It's like insulting your foe to win. Um, they've got bosses, they've got gods, they've got. I mean, like every kind of mini game you could possibly want, and it feels good, for like an open world game to really just say like, yeah, I don't. Everybody plays these things differently. I kind of go region to region, right? So to have a little bit of that in each region feels pretty good because it doesn't feel like I'm getting burned out or stale, and I'm going, conquering a new town. Cool, they got a drinking contest. I'll go do that. This other one has this game of dice that's actually really fun. I kind of
Yeah.
would play a standalone of it. Um, but I think it's a formula that I think people are either going to click with or not, and I think some people have kind of come back along to what Assassin's Creed is now, which is just a straight up RPG. I mean, yeah, there's still the animus, there's still shit going on in the real world, but you don't have to even barely interact with it, honestly, if you don't want to. That's something that I think the series has kind of been doing in a real positive direction. Is you tell the story you want it to. If you want to just basically fish all day, sure, go for it. We're not going to push you back into the animus every 20 minutes just because. So yeah, I mean it's good. I'm probably about 10 hours into it, so I'm just kind of building my settlement and
Yeah. These are
meeting
big
people.
games now, right? They
Huge,
take like
huge.
50, 60 hours at least.
Yeah, I mean I would say at least. It's weird because I think they took some of their cues from the Batman series in some way, which is that a lot more of the stuff has become optional. Um, in a way, not in a bad way, just like it's less and less of a thing that
Oh,
you have to.
that's kind of the opposite of what the Batman series did.
Right.
They made more and more stuff mandatory.
Yeah,
Like to
actually, some
get
of
to
the
the
early
credits in
ones.
Arkham Knight, you had to complete, I think, 12 of 14 side missions.
Yeah.
It was
I guess like
insane.
the earlier ones where it was like the Riddler challenges. If you
Yeah.
did them, you did them. But now it's like, I guess now it is baked in. But like with this, it feels very much like there's going to be some speedrunner who's going to finish this game in 14 hours. You know what I mean? And it's going to just be you go from here to here. Kind of that Skyrim mentality of if you want to go kill the final boss, go ahead. He's there. Go figure him out. You can kill him if you want. Um, but that's kind of the system that they've got built in now. If you get your gear level high enough, the final boss might be a breeze. But if you don't want to, and you want to run right to him, sure, go find him out and try to kill him. It might take you an hour, but doing 12 damage at a time. But you can. So I think that's kind of interesting. It's a series that I feel like, with this being the third game in this new kind of template, I think maybe you get one or two more, and then I don't want to say like a reboot, like as much as Origins was, but you got to kind of figure out where the gameplay and series is going, because it's almost too much right now. It's not there yet for me, but it's right on that cusp of like, damn, like I got a mini game for this, a mini game for that. I've got to go do this. I got to go fish. I got to, so it starts to kind of feel like chore simulator in some ways, but it's not quite there yet. But I can feel that kind of like,
It's always hard to know when you should be paring back,
right?
In a series, like you can keep adding new stuff, and you'll satisfy more and more players with that stuff, but you also kind of alienate people who wanted a more like compact experience or something more focused. So it's a hard balance to strike, and I don't envy the people at Ubisoft having to make that decision.
Yeah, well, that and hopefully they've cleaned house, so I feel a little less bad about playing their games in general. It sounds like at least there was some sort of reckoning in the past couple months. So, it's tough, but the game itself, I mean, I've played worse. I played maybe better. I think that probably Odyssey's still my favorite, but this one has a lot of potential to kind of make up the gap. And I do like what they did. Just one quick thing. I do like that they've kind of balanced the male and female characters, I guess, into the game, so that it doesn't feel like, I don't know how to describe it. Like Cassandra was great. I loved Cassandra, but this one feels a little less like in some good ways. Like it's not weird when your character shows up and is a woman leader of a Viking clan. Like they don't make a bunch of like, a woman could not possibly, like the game's like, nah, it's fine. Like it's totally normal. It was a thing. Kind of like more like, I don't know, like rather than having a bunch of characters comment about how it's weird, it almost feels a little bit more refreshing that it's like, yeah, no, totally normal. Like most of the Viking leaders you meet like have strong, strong representation across the board. And they do try to be kind of multicultural, with some of the characters that you do meet in your city, even though it kind of feels, like they could do a better job, like maybe articulating why that character is there and what their purpose is. But they do at least, give representation and idea in the game, and I think that's a good idea. So, but yeah,
that's good to hear.
Yeah. So Valhalla.
Yeah. Speaking of the major Series X launch titles, the one I've been playing is Yakuza Like a Dragon, but I've been playing that on PC, not on Series X. So I don't know how familiar our listeners are with the Yakuza series. We talk about it a lot, but it's had 7 entries so far, 8 if you count Judgment, and those are all brawlers. So every single one is takes place on a set of compact city maps where you walk around from location to location, watch half-hour cutscenes, and in between you get accosted by punks who want to beat you up for some reason. I don't know. People are super aggressive in this virtual version of Japan. And then you use all sorts of fancy moves to beat the crap out of them. There are special moves called heat moves, or in Judgment, EX moves, which are quick time events that trigger like funny things. So one of them might be that like a store owner will toss you a frying pan and you'll whack a bad guy unconscious with a frying pan. Another one, you'll be like standing on a bridge over a river and you'll like throw the guy over the ledge, and then a boat will be sailing by and the dude lands groin first on the prow of the boat, and like, destroys his nuts, I guess. So like funny shit like that. That's been kind of the staple of the Yakuza games. They're brawlers. They have some light RPG elements. They take place in these compact city maps. And Yakuza Like a Dragon, or Yakuza 7 as it's known in Japan, takes that same template but removes the brawler combat entirely and replaces it with a turn-based JRPG.
Huh.
Yeah, so it's fucking weird. Like, now instead of like beating up thugs, what happens is when you encounter these people who accost you on the street, they like transform into quasi fantasy monsters, and then your team kind of like magical girl transforms, and then you fight
Nice.
in these like turn-based battles. So like your dude will be like running around in his Yakuza suit, and then when the battle starts, he's like wearing a full knight's armor set. But the really funny thing is he's carrying around whatever weapon you've equipped on him. So he could be running around in like this knight's armor set, but his weapon is just like a giant Hitachi wand. It's the greatest fucking thing on the planet. So far, I think it's an interesting change of pace for the series. I think the JRPG combat actually works surprisingly well. It gets a little tedious when you're 80 hours into the game, like I am, but it works surprisingly well. I was shocked that it could have been disastrously bad, because there are turn-based combat systems that just suck, but this one's pretty snappy.
So that sounds like a pretty big reinvention of the series, though. I'm just going in that direction. I've been highly recommending this game, and at some point I definitely want to get into it. But it's one of those, like where to start with zero and everything like so. I want to get into it, but I've always been kind of under the impression maybe like a Japanese take on GTA or like Saints Row or something like that. Kind of like an open world, get a little crazy with it. But I've been kind of told, no, it's not really that 100%. It's not. It doesn't have like the same tones and the same as GTA. It's kind of more of its own thing. But I would
say it's probably a little bit closer in tone to Saints Row than GTA, but it's more like the serious parts are way more serious in GTA, but the goofy parts are about the same as Saints Row.
Okay.
The way I describe it is that it's like, and I've made this analogy like 13 times on this podcast. It's The Sopranos crossed with Better Off Dead.
Yeah. So kind of like, yeah, it's serious, but also knows when it's being kind of over the top, I guess.
Yeah, so like the side content is super goofy. It's stuff like the big side content in this game is like a fully fledged management sim where you run your own rice cracker business. And your company mascot is a chicken called Omelette.
Nice.
Yeah, and not only that, the chicken is an employee. And you can take the chicken to boardroom meetings to argue with shareholders.
That's genius.
It's fantastic. Like my employees right now, they're like the usual assortment of people, but I've also hired a giant Roomba, a chicken, and a chimpanzee, and they're like running half my business. It's great. So yeah, it can get a little silly, but there's also like this serious part of the story. I think Yakuza was kind of originally inspired by like a mixture of Japanese Yakuza films. There's like a whole history of like Japanese crime dramas going way back, but also heavily inspired by American neo-noir, especially the first game of the series. So it's kind of like this mixture of tones between like American gangster films and Japanese gangster films. And that's kind of been the tone it's the serious bits have gone for and the kind of stories they've told up until Yakuza 0, which is almost like the Japanese LA noir in the stories kind of telling. Like LA noir is about the dark side of the post-war economic boom in the United States, and Yakuza 0 is about the dark side of the Japanese 1980s economic boom. And that kind of put the series on a very different path. And then Yakuza 6 told this more like intimate story. Judgment told kind of a more traditional mystery / crime drama with political intrigue. And Yakuza 7, or Like a Dragon, builds off that. And now it's telling this very deeply political story that previous games would have kind of shied away from. Like, there are always corrupt politicians or corrupt cops in previous games, but this one is kind of like the main villain is a politician.
Oh, wow.
Which hasn't happened before. And it very directly kind of confronts issues of homelessness and gentrification, which is not something that previous games and series really tackled.
So do you get the feeling this is a little bit more for Western audience fans of it, or do you think this is making a very pointed political statement for the Japanese audience?
I mean, I get the sense that they know they now have a more global audience. Like, Yakuza 0 is what made the series popular in the West. Mm-hmm. But it's still, like, I mean, I don't want to be too glib about this, but, like, every fictional political party in a Japanese game is some stand-in for the LDP, for the Liberal Democratic Party in Japan. So in this game, it's called the Citizens Liberal Party. Mm-hmm. And, like, not to get too lost in the weeds in Japanese politics, but the LDP has dominated Japanese federal politics. I think they've been out of power for 3 years since Japan, like, became a democracy following World War II. And so, like, pretty much every Japanese game that features some kind of critique of Japanese politics takes aim at some aspect of LDP policy. And in this case, it's taking aim at, I mean, like, the generic corruption kind of stuff, but also, like, how urban policies disadvantage the disenfranchised, like sex workers, people like or immigrants, or people like that. It's very much kind of like taking aim at that in the Japanese context. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's something that, like, we as people in the West playing these games will kind of latch onto, but you'll also see a lot of commentary that kind of tries to pattern match it to the way these issues exist in, like, say, the United States or the UK. Right. And it's not always, like, 100%
it's not a
the correct match.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, there are definitely some similarities. So yeah, it's been an interesting experience I mean, I think I'm nearing the end. By nearing the end, I mean I'm like 20 hours from it. But okay. This is a huge game. Highly recommended if you've liked previous Yakuza games and don't mind turn-based combat. If you're, like, so wedded to the brawler combat that turn-based combat would turn you off, then maybe this isn't the game for you. But if you liked kind of the more recent entries in the Yakuza series, like Yakuza 5 onwards, then I think this will be more your speed. So
that's good. Like I said, I've always been interested in picking it up. It's kind of a daunting franchise, but I've heard so many good things from, like, actually, like, a lot of different groups of gamers. One of my friends I play a lot of Destiny with is just in love with the series, you know. So it's kind of out of the norm for him. He's more of a straight shooter guy, but I mean, he can't say enough good things about this. And so, I mean, I've always heard good things. It's just been one of those games I just need to break into.
Yeah, I would say they're all very, like, Japanese, mm-hmm. but I don't think you need to be like a hardcore weeaboo to appreciate them. Yeah. But what I will say is that there's some like, based on what I know about your tastes, I think there's some games in the series that'll appeal to you more than others. Like, I would highly recommend you play 0. Mm-hmm. And I think you'd enjoy 7, maybe Kiwami 1 and 2, but I wouldn't, like, go tell you to play 3 or 4.
Yeah, and that's what
I say as someone who likes 3.
That like, as a series, it's been an experimental series in some ways. For something
story-wise, yeah, absolutely.
For something that seems so popular and, like, so kind of, you know, like, at this point, like, it seems like it's almost like a tentpole franchise. You know, for the fact that it's a launch title, and it's not, you know, shouldn't be missed. But
yeah,
you know,
it's so weird to me that this, like, one of the Series X's biggest launch titles is a mm-hmm. Yakuza game.
Yeah,
it's like, I can't imagine like, I'd heard of the Yakuza franchise before 0 came out, but I barely knew what it was about. So going back, like, 6 years and imagining Sega working with Microsoft to launch a niche Japanese title as one of the tentpole franchises for a new console launch is just unimaginable.
Yeah, and even talking just kind of in general about this console launch, it feels weird for everyone, for both sides. I mean, Sony's biggest is, I'm guessing, Demon Souls.
Yeah, like a remake is the biggest launch title.
Yeah, it just feels like a weird generation. I know that studios right now have been struggling because of COVID. I get it. I mean, I like to make fun of 2077 never coming out as much as the next guy, but like it does start to feel like, yeah, it's not easy to design a game from home. For various reasons, it's just not something that's easily done. But at the same time, it does kind of feel like the console launch was going to happen regardless. And I'm wondering if maybe it even should have. I mean, with no launch titles, with the supply issues they've been having, it just kind of seems weird. Like,
I mean, the thing is, though, these things, like, there are supply issues, but demand has, like, vastly exceeded supply. And the supply's been pretty high. Like, it's important to remember that, like, let's go back to, I guess, 2012. When the Wii U launched, it actually launched with respectable numbers and then had no tail.
Right. Yeah.
But these people, like, I think they've both nearly outsold. Like, they've had a vastly better launch than the Wii U. They're saying a better launch than the PS4 and Xbox One, which is nuts.
Right. And yeah, some of that might just be that, I mean, people who have never been into gaming are now coming around because of the situation. My brother is prime example number one. I mean, he's been begging me to find him an Xbox, and I'm like, man, it's easier said than done right now. It is tough, And
like we're hearing all these stories now about like Amazon drivers stealing them. Stealing them to scalp.
I think in the UK they had a weird, like, almost like a ring, like a smuggling ring from like you would have had in like the 1800s almost, like this smuggling ring of people who are basically like getting them, selling them online, and just like it's a
like
real
a PS5 Speakeasy kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like you paid $40 to belong to this group, and this group somehow, some way gets them, most likely from stealing them, but the people who get them don't care, and it's a very weird setup right now. Phil Spencer was basically saying, look, we got to figure this out in the future because these scalpers, right, it shouldn't be a thing that the majority of consoles right now in certain regions are going through scalpers. It's ridiculous, That's not to say it's been perfect here in the U.S., but I've been hearing nightmare stories or reading nightmare stories in a lot of places where it's like,
it's been like especially bad in the UK and in parts of Europe, and like it's not like they didn't try; they just didn't get it right. Like people were ridiculing the whole, you have to sign up. For like PlayStation Soul, you have to sign up for a chance to buy a PS5,
right?
And people are like, "This is the worst of late capitalism." But then, and like I say this as someone who is like deeply critical of many aspects of capitalism, but then I realized this is actually an anti-scalping measure. Mm-hmm. Like they are allocating a set of PlayStations for people whom they can verify would really want PlayStations,
right. And it wouldn't go to just some storefront to be sold at a high markup, which is even probably worse for them. But I think about like I think the future is going to be like kind of what Microsoft did with what was their bundle. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was basically like you get a console, you get 2 years of Game Pass, but you finance it for like through like a financing company. I think it was I wonder if that's not the way forward. Is basically you don't pre-order a console, you pre-buy it basically, and then that's your console for good. Basically, you can't sell it because you're financing it for 2 years or whatever. I just that doesn't feel great either. But I really don't know. It's like a weird. Is there a good answer? I'm not sure. But
I mean, like in part, I think that's like not everybody can front $500-$600.
Right.
And like, I can afford that right now, but I might not be able to afford that in the future.
Yeah, especially when I was a college kid, but it's everywhere right now where you've got 3080s impossible to buy for how many months now? For PC people who have been looking to upgrade their card, I don't know how they fix this, the way the tech rolls out versus the way people buy it. It seems like a really tough problem, but I think probably the answer is some version of you put some actual money down, and you probably have like some kind of wait list / line. Those seem to be kind of the two most effective things. But it's just been a weird console launch in general, with so many people who want it unable to get it, with there really not being much to play at the same time. So it's kind
Yeah,
of a
I
weird,
mean, it helps that these are backwards compatible, and
right.
maybe these
Yeah.
people skipped a gen, and now they have this massive backwards compatible library that they can tap into. But like, I'm getting shades of like the Switch's launch
Yep.
here,
Yeah.
which had similar supply issues from months upon months. Didn't get scalped as much for whatever reason. I don't know how Nintendo avoided that. But it, like, I couldn't get a Switch for the longest time.
Yeah.
It was 2 months of looking around before I was able to order a bundle at the correct price. And like, I didn't even want it at launch. This was, I think, 4 or 5 months into its existence.
What was wild about the Switch too is then like a month later, it just seemed like they were everywhere. Like I remember them being sold at like the equivalent of like here, like you got your Targets and your Walmarts, but I remember seeing it at Kohl's, which is like a clothing store, And I was like, man, I guess these things really are that available now. They got them at Kohl's, but
Oh, KOHL. Sorry,
yeah,
I was thinking
KOHL. Yeah.
for a second. I was thinking like Kohl's, the Canadian bookstore.
Oh.
I don't know why I thought that.
Well, if you remember, even back in the Wii day, the Wii was so popular, they were selling Wiis at gas stations. I mean, like,
Yeah.
you couldn't, the demand for Wii, and then the way they got that production ramped up. I mean, my grandparents had a Wii. It was that popular,
Like, my parents asked me about the Wii, and I was like, it exists.
Yeah.
I don't know what to
I
tell
didn't
you.
like it, but it's a weird thing. But the console launch, I think this year is the most confusing I've seen in a while. It doesn't necessarily feel great, but it doesn't feel like they blew it. Like, I'm not ready to say like, oh, what a botch job by either company really. It's just it's a weird time right now. I'm sure you don't want Halo to be delayed, and I'm sure you don't want your I'm not sure what Sony even wanted for their launch titles, but I don't think it was what they got.
I mean, they got Sackboy, which
Yeah.
is apparently okay. I actually think it looks very charming, and I want to play it. I just don't have time right
I've
now.
learned my lesson on 3 different Sackboys by now. It's a great game. It looks fun, and it is not for
Just
me.
not like for you.
No, I mean, like it's hard because like you get into the downloading of it and stuff, and you build your areas, but like the stuff I played versus the stuff I made is very. On
This
two
is
different
complete.
ends.
This isn't like a Little
Oh,
Big
this isn't
Planet,
Little Big
like build your
Planet?
own thing.
Yeah.
This is just like a 3D platformer
Oh, okay.
in the vein of like, I don't know, Mario 3D World or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it just hasn't even been on my radar because I don't know, something about those games. It's charming, but yeah, not for me is what it is. But
Like, it's really hard to nail that balance with a platformer because you want like an interesting challenge and you want cool things to discover, but like often they can feel really rote, or if they don't nail the gameplay super well, then they can get really frustrating to play.
it's hard because that game can only like there's like that teaching curve or whatever you want to call it, where with like a platformer where it's like showing you the language of the game. But at least in the Little Big Planet 2, there was so much because they had to account for everything, almost anyone could throw into it. That at times it was like, man, why do I need to know about pushers, or you know what I mean? So I don't know. Maybe Marvel Avengers was supposed to be bigger than what it was. I kind of barely forget that game exists, but I'm trying to think of other like in that launch window.
I actually, like, I read an article the other day that Square Enix was disappointed in the financial performance of Avengers.
Huh.
And
what do you think? Yeah.
like, the funny thing is, it was like at retail, it was topping the charts and it was selling very well. So I'm assuming it just had no tail, and they're just not making money off like the microtransactions and the battle passes and stuff.
one of the things about Square Enix is whoever is in their accounting department has no concept of what games should sell. I mean, you could hire me tomorrow and I'd probably be better than what they've got, because they're the company that's always surprised when like Tomb Raider doesn't sell, 50 million copies, or like Hitman doesn't, like their expectations for their games are just really weird. They make very good games. Those games are very solid games. They are not the kind of, 100 million sellers that take on the world. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I think every time I've heard Square Enix talk about a game, they're always disappointed in how it performs, and I'm always just like, yeah, that seems about right to me. Like, it's just such a weird discrepancy between, I guess, what they expect and what the game's going to sell. But Avengers I can get, because Avengers should have blown the doors off of any sales record, because it's
the fucking Avengers.
Yeah. The Avengers movies have done that for how long now, I think there were some mistakes. I know a lot of the Xbox people were disappointed that they made Spider-Man system exclusive. And I know that's probably Sony saying, hey, too bad. That's our Spider-Man, But at the same time, that probably feels weird to buy a game missing
Spider-Man.
Yeah. One of the key Avengers in that whole series. I've watched a lot of Twitch, and the Avengers ads are, I mean, it's hard to explain, but so they do this thing where it's almost like it's not just an Avengers ad, it's a 5 Gum Avengers ad, or it's like a, you know what I mean? So I'm just like wondering, like, you don't need these tie-ins with your game. Like, Avengers sells, just put Avengers on a video game and reap the rewards. I would have thought, but man, I guess I was wrong, because, yeah. I don't know. I forget that game even exists, but I'm trying to think of other stuff.
Yeah,
Cyberpunk would have been in the launch window.
I don't. And the weird thing is, and like I know we've like Lovely Bones has alluded to this on the podcast as well, that part of the problem is like this is really a con game, right?
Yeah.
And then they've tried to market it with the rip-off models from the movies.
Right.
And that seems like. And I understand that those probably sell better to like a broad audience who doesn't know who Kamala Khan is. But then they've kind of alienated the comics audience as well.
Right.
So they the movie audience is mad because they're not getting the characters they're familiar with. They're getting these like discount porn parody versions.
Right.
And then the comics fans are mad because you've like buried whom this game is actually about. And so nobody walks away satisfied from this.
Yep. And then you know what always happens too in this type of scenario too? They learn the wrong lesson, and they go, people don't want, they just don't want the female heroes. That's just,
people didn't want the brown lady.
If only we would have put
game.
Iron Man up front and center. And it's like, no, I mean, like, I didn't buy the game because I played
it looked
Destiny.
boring as shit.
Yeah.
That's why.
And you couldn't convince me that the way an Avengers game should go is a Destiny game, and I love Destiny. So if I'm your prime market for someone who already plays a loot-driven story game, you missed me as soon as you said, well, you're not going to be, a new Avenger. You're going to be running around with Iron Man and Thor, and other people are going to be playing Iron Man and Thor, and all the missions are going to be Iron Man. It's just, I don't know. I don't know how you do that. Like,
I really think they should have gone with a more unique look for the characters. They really shouldn't have made them
movie-based
look like the movies.
Yeah.
They should have kind of made them, because I think they wanted that movie audience.
Right.
But you can't lure the movie audience with the Uncanny Valley.
Yeah.
It's just not. They're going to be mad about it.
You've got to trust that your comics audience is so starved for, basically anything at this point, right? Besides Batman,
but it's also not like, people flocked to watch The Dark Knight in theaters. Mm-hmm. That was a huge mass success, and it didn't. Like, I bet a bunch of those people went and bought the Batman games and weren't confused that, Christian Bale wasn't voicing him,
This isn't my Batman.
Where's Christian Bale? Like, that seems silly to us, but that's exactly the tack that they're taking with Avengers. Like, they're trying to make the movie versions without having the movie likenesses.
Being an old dude, I think the biggest parallel I can remember was when Lord of the Rings obviously was, literally all anybody would talk about in polite society. It was like, you couldn't talk about anything else but Lord of the Rings at the time. And then they started to make the games, right? And then there was the one that was basically, okay, so you're not Legolas, you're not Gimli, and you're not Aragorn, going around doing an RPG. The RPG was actually surprisingly solid. It was very fun, I thought. But then, like, you started to kind of figure out, okay, well, now you got the War in the North, and then you've got the Shadows of War. And, like, they started to kind of, like, do different things with Lord of the Rings that I think kind of made it a success. And I wonder if that's what you got to figure out with Avengers. Just like, what's the direction where, you feel like you're a part of the story, but you're just not running around being, Thor in a game full of other Thors, having to find Thor stronger bracers so he can get his attack up by 3, like, it just
like, he's already a hero. Why does he need loot?
Yeah,
right. Like, he's not gonna find a better hammer. It's Thor's fucking hammer, right?
But that's the angle they had to go in, because I think that's the only way you can get that consistent feedback loop. And you probably got shareholders who are like, look,
Destiny's the biggest fucking thing in the world.
It makes money hand over fist, and it's weathered storms that Fortnite hasn't. You know what I mean? So figure it out. But
I think also with this kind of game, I'm getting the sense more and more that, like, Call of Duties and stuff like that aside, you can either like have people pay up front, or you can go free to play and have them pay continuously.
Yep.
And trying to do both nowadays is just not a proposition that people
they're not
really like. Like, you can still have the microtransactions in a $60 game. People will still buy it, but it can't feel like a necessary part of the experience.
Right. And if you're trying to have your game, stand the test of time or be something that people routinely engage with, which is what people want, because those numbers on Destiny aren't an accident. People come back every single expansion. People come back for every release or season or big story moment even, right? To get those kind of numbers, you got to build the game around it first. You can't just hope that people are going to be so into whatever property you're trying to sell them, because Anthem was a good example. I mean, you got BioWare telling a story that should have been a knockout, and it never landed, right? So I think that part of it is you got to have the game first, and then you come around and you do all the microtransactions and the season passes and stuff, because people forget Destiny 1 was almost dead out the door. It was not a smooth launch. There was not a lot in the game. People really weren't as into it as people are now. But you almost had to ride with it and let it get to where it's going to get, and it did. But I don't know if people are going to have that kind of faith now that it's more of a genre than just a game. And there's a real negative perception about games as a service, right? And I don't like that term, and I don't really agree with the perception in a lot of ways, because games as a service have always existed. We just call them MMOs, right? I mean, it ain't nothing new. And people were talking about the WoW killer long before a lot of people were even, thinking about games. What game is going to kill WoW? And the reason they wanted to know is because WoW was literally printing money at the time. I mean, everybody I knew played WoW. It was that kind of level of phenomena, So I mean, I think games as a service aren't really a bad thing. It's just, what do you do with them?
They have to feel like they're worth what you're putting into them. And like, I'm going to contrast this with Genshin Impact, which came out around the same time. Yeah, and that's a game that's completely free to play, but has microtransactions and has a similar kind of content loop, right? But like, that's been a massive success for MiHoYo. And like, it's just because they provided, and it's based off no pre-existing property,
right? But
they provided people with a great value proposition, which is, here's a free-to-play game. There are microtransactions if you want better characters. And people are willing to pay for the better characters because they're invested
in the game itself.
In the game itself. They made a lot of effort into the game itself. It's not the approach that they seem to take with Avengers, which is pay us $60 up front, then pay us more for better shit.
Right. And have faith that we're going to build a game around it, because I know you're not liking this shit right now, but just trust us. We're going to fix it. That's what Anthem did too, right? And a lot of people are like, no, I'm not going to sit around and wait for you to fix this. Like, I'm out. I'm on to the next bigger and better thing, because that's what a lot of gamers do, man. They're just on to the next bigger and bigger. Think about, like, I don't say this negatively. I play videos, a lot of Call of Duty gamers, right? But that's almost a mindset. Like they bounce from Call of Duty to Battlefield to Call of Duty to Apex Legends to Fortnite, and they're following that trend, and that's not a bad place to be if you enjoy shooting games, for example, right? If you just like
Yeah.
that genre, it's not a bad place to be to follow the trend. But what these game companies are trying to do is say, hey, stop on this game. This is the one that you want to stick with, right? And you got to have the game there that makes that worth it, because so far I don't think a lot of companies have done that. I mean, you're playing catch up to a lot of these big names, and if you're not willing to show people, hey, in 6 months here's the value added, I guess, right? Like a lot of people are out the door, they're on to the next thing. So and I know even with when I used to play MMOs, after WoW kind of slowed down, I wouldn't even say died because it's still hugely
Still
successful,
going.
right? But even after WoW died, I remember there was like this like gang of like 20 or 30 of us MMO exiles, bouncing from like weird Korean MMO to like Matrix Online to Tabula Rasa to all these like MMOs that were promising that that dopamine hit that EverQuest and WoW gave us, and none of them could deliver. So you just ended up being this like weird roaming band of a guild, trying out weird MMOs, and you did it for a while. And people eventually just kind of went back to WoW, honestly. So, but yeah, so I mean that's kind of my thing on games as a service. But going back to Avengers, just kind of wrap it up. I think if had it been a launch title, or had it been kind of in that window, maybe it would have had a different sort of life for people just wanting to see it for different reasons, or literally just have something to play. But I feel like that game has oddly come and gone. And for such a huge game and such a huge release, something that felt so long in coming.
Something that took 3 different studios, like 2 different studios working full time. 2 like studios that would usually make a game by themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was like both Eidos Montreal and Crystal Dynamics devoting all their resources to this, and it just didn't like register. It's such a, and like, I mean, we have to kind of account for our own internal biases there, because it did sell really well at retail.
Sure.
But like that it disappeared from the public consciousness so fast means it has no tail, which means no consistent revenue going to Square Enix.
Right. Like you're not, like, for example, my kid, when he asks for a present, what does he ask his parents for? Or V-Bucks, right? I don't know anybody who's asking for Eidos cash. I don't even know what it is called. You know what I mean? But I'm guaranteeing you that that's the level of what they wanted from marketing was, hey, all kids are going to be asking for this year is Avenger bucks, to
I mean,
the
they have like 5 different kinds of currencies,
right.
So that's probably part of the confusion.
But I mean, when you're not at that level of V-Bucks, when I know what your currency is called because my kid's asking me for it every couple of weeks, you know what I mean?
I fucking know what it's called, and I've never played a
Right.
second of Fortnite.
Exactly. So I mean, that's the kind of level of public consciousness you want when you're making these kind of games, And I think it's a bad sign that, like, I get it. Not every currency needs to be named something cool to reach that level, but I mean the fact that you're not getting there at all with an Avengers game probably ain't a great sign for those studios. And hearing that they're calling it a big loss, makes sense to me. I mean,
I really hope this doesn't like. I mean, Crystal Dynamics I think is kind of a feather in Square Enix's cap, but I really hope this doesn't result in the closure of Eidos Montreal.
I don't think it. I mean, like, this is the kind of game where I feel if anybody kind of takes a critical look at it, this has the fingerprint of like marketing and PR and like upper level management's thumbprint over so many aspects of the game.
Yeah, but they never blame themselves, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's true.
That's my concern. But I don't know. Maybe Square Enix will pleasantly surprise me and will let these studios live to create projects that I actually care about.
I 100% agree. Even when when we were talking about this, even at announcement, we're like, "What is this?" Like it never left that level for me. So
I was so like psyched for the idea of like this story-driven superhero game with multiple characters, and that just didn't materialize.
Yeah, and there are. I mean, I'm not saying you have to be obviously you don't want to just be Marvel, not what is it, Ultimate Alliance. You don't want to just remake Ultimate Alliance, but that's a pretty good blueprint for how you make an Avengers game, because I'm sure if you've got the Avengers, right, you can build, Marvel, I don't know what their deal is or whatever, but if they were able to get certain tertiary characters just in the game, as villains and as stuff like that, I mean, you gotta.
I'm sure there's like somebody who'd be super duper psyched to play a Squirrel Girl, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that's what you do. That's your revenue, is just getting all those little weird characters from here and there into the game, But build it around the Avengers, and that's your interaction point for the most part, is the main Avengers in the story, and then just go from there. Don't do weird loot stuff with it. When I heard there was loot in it, that was kind of like a real head scratcher. I mean, yeah, Ultimate Alliance had loot, but it was kind of like in the ways that you upgraded your powers and things like that, and that all kind of worked for me. But getting like a physical bracer that your character equips to give you more power, just, I don't know, it's all felt kind of wrong.
It's the wrong approach for this kind of game. I think what Warner Brothers is doing with the upcoming Gotham Knights might be the way to go.
Agree, yeah.
Where it's just it is, I think, 3 or 4 characters. But it's a single player experience that can also be played co-op, and there's not this huge focus on like loot and all that stuff. It's just like a self-contained single player experience that might have some tail, but they've explicitly said it's not games as service. Of course, in the initial reveal, it looked like that, and people were getting a little annoyed. They're like, you're releasing Suicide Squad, you're releasing Gotham Knights, basically the same fucking thing. And then the Gotham Knights people have to come out and say, no, this is intended to be a single player or co-op experience, not very loot based, blah blah blah. So even they're kind of like, even like Warner Brothers is having that problem with marketing and like trying to pitch the game as what it is.
And Warner Brothers has to kind of walk a finer line too, because you do kind of risk Batman oversaturation, right? I mean, in a way, right? Like, when that's the big one you got. I mean, DC's Superman games have never hit. You got the Justice
and like
League
Green
there.
Arrow and stuff like that isn't big enough,
right? Like, to put it, you couldn't make a whole Wonder Woman, maybe. I mean, you probably have to figure out a cool gameplay loop for why she's different than just running around punching people like Batman. But there's potential there. But I mean, when I look at what did Avengers? They said Avengers lost like something like $100 million or something for. I think it was in yen. I don't know what the conversion is, but it was something like 5 billion
100
yen.
million yen. 100 million yen would be just around $1 million, which isn't that big a loss.
So, I mean, when you hear those types of like catastrophic numbers to lose, and then you say with a Marvel Avengers game, like, you start to really think like, I mean, if that game cost $200 million to make and still managed to lose 100 million, I mean, damn. That thing would have to sell skin packs forever. Like, you're talking like flop level movie type things,
Oh yeah, it's definitely a lot of the marketing budget that ate it up. Like, they're doing these hour-long Avengers War Table streams that, like, who the fuck tuned into those?
Yeah.
And like, you could see the viewership numbers on YouTube, and it's just like, you can watch more people tune into the typical VTuber stream than into like this fucking War Table shit, and that's like bad.
Yeah,
that's not a good problem to have.
It's hard to build up engagement, right? Like, when I see it in Destiny, I kind of see it from like these different streams almost, right? Like different avenues. So you got one group who's really into the PvP, right? And they want to know about gun balancing and what the meta is going to be for this season. And what I mean? Like, that's kind of where their thoughts are, right? Then you've got the lore hobbits. That's what they're called, the lore hobbits. The people who want to know, why does this character say this one cryptic line in this one scene? Is it actually, but you start to get kind of those different streams of interest into a game, right? I don't know. I think maybe they thought with the movies and the comics and stuff like that, but it just feels so different and so not in the same thing that I think most people are like, look, I mean, I watched the movies. What more do you want? The movie's kind of told the story, and the story's kind of, for the most part, almost done at this point. I guess you get a new phase starting with Black Widow, but nobody's really seen it. So I don't know. It's always, to me, it's interesting to analyze some of these flops. I know movies and podcasts and stuff like that like to do that with movies just as much, because it's almost a similar idea. Like, when you've got something that seems such a slam dunk and you've got such a big budget and you've got so many talented people, how does failure happen is almost as interesting as a story as how does success happen, you know? Um, so yeah.
Yeah, and like I'm reading like this article on Kotaku got posted earlier this week about the success of Monolith Soft, which is one of Nintendo's internal development studios, and like these stories are kind of fascinating because you can see the decisions that were made at critical junctures that led to success.
Right.
Like for Monolith Soft, it was Nintendo like effectively restricting the scope of what they could do to make a more focused game that would get out the door and sell units.
Right, and sometimes that's what you need, you know. And
That's what they needed. And like I'm thinking, the people at Square Enix aren't like they're not managing their studios that same way to ensure the success of their titles. And you wonder if they brought in I forget the guy's name at Nintendo, the executive. I'll put it in the link dump. But whoever was managing Monolith Soft at Nintendo, if you brought them to Square Enix and had them manage, I don't know, Crystal Dynamics,
right.
would they produce a better Avengers game? You have to wonder.
And it's part of the reason when I hear stuff like Bethesda being bought, maybe that's a good thing. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe there is some type of studio management that would benefit them. You know, Bungie's had some issues since separating from Activision, where a lot of people thought, oh, this is all Activision. No, some of it seems to have been their call because they're still making some missteps in certain things, you know. So when you start to hear, like, you know, every now and then, like maybe Kojima did better. You know what I mean? With underneath
Konami?
Yeah, underneath Konami. I don't know.
I would say after having played Death Stranding that I don't think I think Konami was mostly the problem.
Yeah, but
in that case.
Yeah.
But they did have good reason to be frustrated with him. He was constantly over schedule and like past schedule and over budget. Mm-hmm. And that's like a valid reason to be frustrated with the creator. Of course, the way they treated him was
awful. Yeah.
Like inexcusable.
And the fact that they decided to rescope their entire company, you know, after getting rid of him kind of tells you where their head was. But yeah, I mean, I think there is, you know, we talk about it a lot, and sometimes studios do get the bad rap, you know, and the poor, you know, lovely devs, and you know, yeah, some of that is true, but at the same time, you do need to get the game out the door sometimes, and the games now are hugely expensive.
There are a lot of like, and it's not even like the rank and file devs sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's management within studios that can fuck shit up.
Oh yeah,
like we've heard the stories of BioWare now,
exactly
and
yeah.
EA has been like relatively hands off with BioWare.
It's weird, right?
It's just been their own internal fuck ups.
Everybody was so ready to say, well, I mean, this has to be EA forcing them to make Anthem, and then like all those stories start to come out.
And like EA were the people who were like, you have to keep the fly.
Yeah, literally the most fun part of the game was like EA saying, hey, don't take the fun thing out. Leave the fun thing in, and then figure out how to make it work, basically.
And it's not like EA is always the good guys. No. They've mismanaged other studios really badly, like what they did with Visceral. Mm-hmm. But each of these stories is unique. Right? And each of them, like, there's somebody along the way who made a poor decision. It might have been a publisher executive, might have been studio management, and like there's blame to go around in a lot of these scenarios.
What's kind of been interesting lately, I think, is that you've got like amazing people like Jason Schreier and like some of the guys who do like the studio breakdowns. And so you're seeing a little bit more of what actually went wrong rather than kind of you used to get these like differing sides almost from like, you know, the dev would say this, the studio would say that, and it's like, well, why did Westwood really close down? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now, like, it used to be kind of like whispered in the dark, you know, oh, well, they wanted them to do this and they wouldn't. So, but now you're kind of almost getting this different level of like, yeah, the Anthem was actually BioWare's baby and they were in love with it, but they put no effort towards it. You know, so when you start to hear stuff like that, it kind of changes some of the mentality of like what did or didn't go wrong with the game that I don't think you got in the past almost, you know?
Yeah, and we're seeing that like even now with what's it called, CD Projekt Red,
Mm-hmm.
and then people like Liana Ruppert have been like trying to report on what's going on there, and it's remarkable how much of this boils down to just like weird decisions that management made, or in the case of Cyberpunk, it's actually Polish securities law that's played a weird role in how all this has gone down. Like in Poland, you're literally not allowed to tell your employees about something that could be material to a share price before you announce it to the general public.
It's insane. Yeah, I mean,
like that's really bizarre to like an American audience, which are like, yeah, of course you can tell your employees, they just can't trade on that, and you trust that they won't trade. And in Poland, they're like, well, we don't even want the scope for insider trading, so we're just gonna nip it right at the bud.
Well, when you see like stuff like the Twitter guy like saying like, go ahead and take time off of work, this thing's out the door, you know, and then actually like the next day it was delayed.
That's like fucking embarrassing, but they're bound by law to do that, which is weird, but it is what it is. So yeah, that's kind of what's going on in the game dev scene. I did want to mention before we moved on to the main topic that I finished, been through now the entire Master Chief Collection on PC.
There you go.
Which has been a really interesting experience. I would say that at the start of 2020, I was not really a Halo fan. And at the end of 2020, I am a Halo fan.
Yep, come around, huh?
Who knew?
Yeah.
I mean, like some of my opinions, I think, have stayed largely intact. I don't think Combat Evolved holds up that well.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, having replayed it, I would agree with that, honestly. It's hard to say.
It's really a game of its time.
Right.
And some of the, like, nobody likes the library.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But then, like, I've played through the other games. You know, I really loved Halo 2 and Halo Reach. Halo 4, I think I'm more positive than the general consensus on it. I really dig what they did with the aesthetic and the new weaponry. Even if I don't think the Forerunners are all that much fun to actually fight. But they did a great job with the story and the new combat scenarios and all the rest of that. So, you know, good on them for getting that out the door. It's been really interesting to play through a series that I previously didn't have a super high opinion of, and come out on the other side thinking, yeah, I understand why people really like this now.
Well, it's very hard too, because like you said, some of it's of its time, right? Definitely. But on the other end of it too, it's got this massive level of hype. I mean, genre-defining games tend to do that, you know?
It's informed so much of modern shooter design, and sometimes not in the best ways, because I think a lot of shooters have taken the wrong lessons. Like, things that were implemented well in Halo are really poorly implemented in other shooters.
Oh, 100%.
Like, the 2-weapon limit is like a Halo thing.
Yeah.
And so many shooters should not have a 2-weapon limit, but do, just because that's what you expect from console shooters, right?
Right.
But, like, there's a reason it works the way it does in Halo, and it works well for Halo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many of, you know, it's something where you could write a book about why this works in Halo and doesn't work in other games. But even, for example, picking up weapons, enemy weapons, right? I love that idea in Halo, because it's like you'll go through entire sections and have a completely different experience running through it with a needler than you would with a DMR, right?
Right.
But then I started to see that kind of creep in other games. So now, like, I'm playing a Call of Duty and I'm finding, you know, oh, this guy dropped a scoped AK when I've got an M16. What's the difference? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like,
that's my exact problem. I'm thinking back to Modern Warfare, which I played last year, the 2019 Modern Warfare, not the original, and that similarly has a 2-weapon limit, but all the weapons are just like semi-automatic rifles.
Yeah, there's no needler. There's no.
Like, you know, what do I care that one fires slightly faster than the other?
Right.
They do the same fucking thing. Like, weaponry does not matter in that game.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of the same experience I had, you know, when, you know, Halo didn't really have, I heard some people talk about how Halo had like an ammo limit or like kind of like scarcity. And that's not really true. What it did, though, was it kind of forced you in a subtle way, hey, you got to learn different guns in this game. And then that kind of
Yeah.
fed into the whole multiplayer scene as well, because you didn't feel like, oh well, I'm only good with this one gun, and that at the time that was a big thing. When you would play a multiplayer match, you kind of would either have a loadout or the guns would be on the map. Like when I would play, GoldenEye with my brother, I knew that I could destroy him if I got an RCP 90, but then that was the rest of my time was trying to find an RCP 90. But that's kind of how it worked, I guess.
Yeah, Halo kind of forces you to get good with everything. Like your pistol runs out of ammo,
Right.
but the guy you just shot dropped a plasma rifle, so now you better get used to firing that plasma rifle.
Right, exactly, and that's what I like. But yeah, I mean, I think Halo had a lot of pros and cons, and I think it being what it was when it was really important, especially for consoles, because I mean, yeah, I think if you run into a new world where it was just Nintendo and Sony making consoles, I don't know how that works out. Totally cutting Microsoft out of the scene, but I liked what I played, and I'm glad you finally finished it, because now you can have lots of in-depth Halo talk. And I'll tell you, the books aren't half bad if you ever read them.
I might get into them if I have time. Like right now, I'm a weeaboo. I'm on a fucking manga kick right now, so that might have to wait for a while. But I should get into it, because there's this interesting world, and I feel like the games only tell like 1/8 of the story.
They really do. I mean, when you start to get into like what the Forerunners really were, and what like the Prometheans, and there's a lot of stuff there, and that's kind of one of the reasons I've stuck with Destiny as much as I have is like when you start to build that into your world, and you go back and something that was like said 3 years ago or 2 games ago, all of a sudden having a payoff to me is so rewarding. Like I'm a sucker for payoff. Some cast off line or some piece of thing on a ground that some people noticed and some people didn't. When you go back around and you make that an actual thing in your game, I love that shit, honestly. So a lot of that going on in Halo.
I kind of love the idea in Halo 4. Like some people find it silly, but it's in Halo 4 that you find out that this is the second cycle of humanity.
That's not when you find that out,
and it's kind of been alluded to earlier.
Yeah,
but it's in Halo 4. We were like, oh yeah, humans were spacefaring.
Yeah.
And then we made them cavemen again.
And then we basically bombed them into cavemen. And then this is your second time up here. I think that's a really neat thing that you might miss or you might not even catch your first time through, but then you start to like layer that into lore, and the game really does a good job with it. So you don't ever feel like you're not learning something every time you go into a new area and they're talking to you and stuff. So
yeah. We're going to talk about games that influenced us, and the reason we want to do this is because, like I suggested in the intro, we talk a lot about the games we're currently playing, but we don't talk too much about games we played a long time ago that kind of got us to where we are today in terms of gaming. So today we're going to talk about the 5 games that have most influenced each of us. They're not necessarily our favorite games, but they're all games that had an impact on us in some way. And maybe they introduced us to a new genre that we now love, or maybe they got us to look at the medium in a different light, or maybe they even sparked our interest in a completely different topic. So let's dive in. Kappa, what's a game that like really influenced you?
Yeah, sure. And I kind of thought about this in a couple different ways. Like one, like you were saying, like what kind of genres did I kind of, what games pushed me into that? What games did I enjoy the most? Sometimes your favorite game isn't always the best game. And I think we all know that. But try to think of this like just different aspects, and I think the number one answer that I came in terms of how I influenced me, both like how I game and how kind of just in general how I play games and think about games, was the first Warcraft, Orcs and Humans. This was a game I mostly played with my friend at the time. He had a computer, I didn't, so we both got insanely into this game, to the point where we would ride our bikes after school to his house, before his dad could get home from work, and put, as much time as we could in Warcraft before we had to go home. We got involved in like writing strategies about the game, basically to BBSs at the time, so I'm sure they were highly sought after, opinions of, 12, 13-year-old kids on how to beat certain stages. But things like that were kind of really where I started with PC game kind of in general. There was stuff before it, obviously, your Oregon Trails and things like that, you know, kind of those old staples. But this was when like gaming really kind of came into my like mindset of something that I wanted to do like as a hobby, and thinking more about it, like kind of like something that I'd be interested in learning more about a lot. Um, Warcraft was, I mean, at the time, it was huge. It
Yeah.
in the PC gaming scene, it was not like some unheard of, you know, secret gem. No, it was gigantic. Everyone knew about it. Everyone talked about it. Blizzard kind of came into its own from it. But weirdly, you know, I talked about this before. You could actually call them, like call the studio and just talk to like literal developers. I talked to Mike Borheim once about a stage that I was having a bug on. They would tell you, you know, different things to try, or they'd actually tell you the cheats over the phone. It really had a feeling of what today would probably be called an artisanal game company, right? I mean, they gave a shit. Their boxes, you know, were full of stuff for you to, you know, whether it's pads of
Oh yeah.
papers or I mean, just
I remember old PC game boxes. They were
yeah,
fantastic.
uh,
I still
posters and
remember like my
maps and
old,
yeah,
yeah, my old SimCity 2000 game box came with not only like 100 something page manual, but also like this booklet about urban development and imagining the future. It was amazing.
and this was at a time when the other PC games I was getting was from a guy at a flea market who just sold me floppy disks of games. Do you know what I mean? Like that was my
Oh
level of
yeah,
PC gaming at the time. Was I'd go to the flea market, it would be a little
it
floppy
was like
disk.
shareware
Yeah,
games.
well, a lot of times it was not shareware, if you get what I mean. But yeah, I mean, like it would be like, hey man, what's this cannon fodder game? I don't know, $5. That was the level of game buying I had at the time. So when I got into Warcraft, it was a complete different experience. It was like probably like going to like, I don't know, like Cineplexes your whole life, and then finally going to like, you know, a sit
The
down
Alamo
with,
Draft
yeah,
House.
exactly. You know, like wow, this is a whole different experience that I had no idea was a thing. Um,
I still remember the transition from like floppy disk games to CD-ROM games, and
mhm.
CD-ROMs hold, I think, 400, 500 times as much data.
Yeah, yeah.
So
It was wild. So I mean, like that was
yeah,
Warcraft was my first CD-ROM game in a lot of ways. I mean, I played Myst, but I think everybody like it was a law at the time you had to play Myst in school. Um, but I really loved it. I mean, like the whole experience, playing it with a friend, trying to get through different scenarios, the story, the setting, even the graphics at the time. I mean, going back and playing it, I mean, I can't believe I thought the graphics were as good as they are. But you know, the missions were very much not just build a base and do things, which were what a lot of the RTSs at the time were. You know, you'd have a mission where you started in a dungeon and you didn't even see any humans. You fought spiders and oozes and stuff like that. Um, the idea that each mission started with like an intro and it told you what you were doing and why you were doing it kind of felt cool. Um, the voiceovers, the art, I mean, the super stylized art that I think a lot of people, you know, now associate with not even just Warcraft, probably fantasy in general, you know,
yeah.
um, or at the time were just, I mean, it was just, I would just flip through pages and pages of the book. And just love, you know, like each little how they drew the troll berserker with horns and you know, things like that would be all I would think about while I was at school was Warcraft. That my entire mind was Warcraft at the time, and it was just how fast could I get home? How fast could I ride my bike to get to my friend Josh's house to play more Warcraft? You know, so I mean, it took over, and then I think I might have told this story before, but you know, we were doing all right, but we weren't the richest family, and we didn't have a computer yet, and I wanted Warcraft 2 like no other. And this was back when PC Gamer used to insert demo discs, right?
Yeah.
And so I shoplifted a PC Gamer with the Warcraft 2 demo disc in it. My mom, being a mom, of course, was like, "Where did you get the money for this?" Because PC Gamers back then were ridiculously expensive as far as magazines went. I think they were like maybe like $7 or $8, you know. And so my
Yeah.
mom knew I didn't have just $7 or $8 laying around, so she kind of figured out kind of quickly, you know, where I got it from, and made me go back to the Walmart, return it, apologize. You know, they did the whole kind of scared straight thing with me for a little bit. I knew I wasn't in that big of a trouble, you know, but it was definitely like a formative moment for me that one of my first, you know, brushes with getting in real trouble was shoplifting a PC Gamer mag because of the Warcraft demo. So, I still think about that, and I was like, man, what a nerdy first way to get in trouble. But yeah, so that's my kind of personal and genre touch, and that kind of probably put me on 2 or 3 years of nothing but RTSs, your Command and Conquerors, and there were some other little weird ones that were around at the time. RTS was kind of more of a genre than it is now, and
Yeah, they're not like the big budget affairs anymore.
yeah.
They're very much in the indie space these days.
Yeah, and it was kind of a moment in time that I really enjoyed as far as getting into and finding out about gaming and spending my time doing stuff. Kind of a social aspect to it too, so I didn't have that weird first interaction with gaming where I was just locked in for months or whatever. But yeah, that was my first one. Was probably Warcraft, Orcs and Humans.
Interesting. The way I've I've written mine kind of chronologically as well. So let me go back to one of the first CD-ROM games I played, and I must have been like, I don't know, 10 years old at the time, maybe even younger. And it was a game called Marble Drop, and I'm starting with like the most obscure game on this list. I'm willing to bet most of our listeners haven't heard of this one. So let me describe what it is. So it's a series of puzzles. Each one's a contraption that has a set of funnels at the top and a set of receptacles at the bottom. As there are tracks going from the funnels to the receptacles, but there are all sorts of weird doodads and gizmos along the way that might change the direction of the track or might change the color of the marble that you put in the funnel at the top. And the goal is to get the correct colored marbles into the correct receptacles. And the interesting twist is that this all unfolds in real time. So sometimes you have to drop a marble in the funnel at the correct time to trigger one gizmo to make the track go in a certain direction to get the other marble into the right receptacle. It's an interesting concept.
Yeah,
And it was not super well received at the time. And if I were to go back and play that now, I'd probably just be like, wow, this is dull. But for me, playing that game then, it was fantastic and I loved it. And it's probably the reason I'm into puzzle games now. Everybody would have played Portal getting back into gaming, in 2010 or whatever. But this also got me into more obscure puzzle games. So I'm a big fan of games like Parallax and Timely and these other games that a lot of people wouldn't have played. And that's probably the reason I'm into puzzle games now, is playing this weird CD-ROM game that EA put out. It was actually made by Maxis.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
In fact.
You know what this reminds me of? There was a similar game kind of around that same time called The Incredible Machine. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, I remember that. It's kind of in a similar vein of these unlikely contraptions. Incredible Machine, you kind of have a lot more freedom in how you solve the puzzles. Marble Drop is a lot more regimented, but it's kind of got that same spirit of trying to find trying to find solutions to these Rube Goldberg style puzzles.
Yeah, because when I read the pre-read for this one, I think that I was thinking of Marble Madness, the Mark Cherney, kind of famous Atari game. And I didn't even realize that this game, and I started looking at it, like, this would have been right up my alley when I was a kid, because it does look really, really like the thinking style of puzzle, not the myth style of puzzle, which there really wasn't a lot of for a while. It kind of took it took a while for that kind of to sort of develop the puzzle idea game, where it wasn't just like, oh, this is just going to be really hard and you're going to find it through obscure clicking or finding the right pixel or whatever.
It's a game that really rewards experimentation. So you put a few test marbles down the track to kind of figure out how the contraption works, and then you kind of learn through trial and error, and then you use that to plan ahead for how to solve the puzzle. So it's really the model that modern puzzle games follow,
right?
And not like your obscure adventure game point and click kind of puzzling.
Yeah, this is a cool one, man. I really wish I would have played it, honestly. It looks like it would have been right for me.
Yeah, not available for purchase anymore, unfortunately.
Like most of them. Sometimes you can find them on those abandonware sites or things like that.
Yeah, I don't think it's technically legal to
Uh,
download it, but since EA isn't selling it
yeah.
anymore, fuck it, go ahead. Just go
Yeah.
download that shit. Um,
And if your
I,
EA
I,
starts selling it, because I'm sure you could stick it in the origin store and someone will download it. You got the rights for it. Why not?
yeah, I don't know why they just don't put it up. It would cost like costs are negligible
Yeah.
once you've got it up there. But I don't know. Maybe getting it to run on modern PCs is a pain.
Yeah, that's always true. Then you got more people frustrated that it won't run than, she just said, here, we're just going to turn a blind eye and you figure out how to make it work.
Makes sense. So what about another game that
Yeah, sure.
influenced you?
So my second one that I was going to come up with was kind of what brought me into kind of like the JRPG land for where I kind of lived for, I'd say most of the late 90s, maybe even to some of the early 2000s. And I don't think it's going to be the Final Fantasy most people think, but for me it was Tactics. Final
Oh
Fantasy
yeah,
Tactics was, yeah,
that's like the most beloved one
I think so
nowadays.
too, and I don't know, like if that's like kind of like a retcon because at the time it was six. I mean, everybody was crazy for six. Um, but something about tactics just kind of hit right. Some of it was how the gameplay worked. Some of it was the game world itself. But a lot of it for me was just the characters and then the customization. Like as far as jobs and things like that. I never like at the time I always felt like it was so freeing to find a character that I liked and just make them into what I wanted them to be. And like it really kind of like opened up the RPG part of the JRPG to me a lot, where I was spending more time thinking like, what would this character want to do in this world? Would they want to be a bard or would they want to be an archer? I actually did art role play, and I guess kind of like a confession here. Like for a long time, I didn't understand what role playing meant, even though I was constantly playing RPGs, because I was generally playing, what I would today more consider an action game, right? Like
Yeah,
you are this character in this world, you go here, you do this. That's not really role playing if you think about it. Do you know what I mean?
yeah.
You're just more kind of moving a character from spot to spot. But this was the first time I really thought like, oh wow, I'm actually deciding what this character does as a job or as and it's affecting the battles. And yes, there's definitely some things that make these battles easier or harder depending on what I choose. But at the same time, I can have a lot of fun with like maybe I need 5 archers in this party. Let's see what happens. Making really
So
bad decisions like that.
you're kind of like min maxing within the role
Yeah,
play as opposed to role playing within the min
right.
max.
And years later, I would actually play the game and do the exact opposite. I would be like, I'm going to figure out how to get max stats. You know what I mean? Like just because it's a different style of gameplay than what I had been doing, which was like, of course I want to have 5 dragon handlers or, and then slowly figuring out, wow, this is a very stupid decision. I have no one who can heal and I'm getting decimated every fight. Um, but that's the kind of like role playing that kind of put me into that RPG mindset. Going back and playing a lot of the Final Fantasies, honestly, I was always a little disappointed that I didn't have a lot of the freedom or a lot of the gameplay experiences that I did with Tactics. Not to say they were all bad or anything like that. I mean, they're all, I think different
They're
levels.
like solid
Yeah.
games. Yeah.
But I really just go back and I think about, that first experience with Tactics kind of set an impression for me and really put me on JRPGs for a while. But I was always kind of chasing. At the time, I didn't know this. I was chasing something that really didn't exist in many other forms, except for maybe Ogre Tactics, which I found kind of later on in its life, which was kind of an obscure game at the time. But always kind of chasing that type of gameplay that really just wasn't a thing. I didn't know it. But Tactics kind of was a genre setter for me when it comes to JRPGs. And it's still kind of like my favorite JRPGs still tend to have some of those same formulas, very fluid class systems, interesting but not complex leveling system, not overly complex, I would say, where it makes sense why you're leveling what you're leveling. Different.
You might like the new Yakuza game
Yeah,
then because
maybe.
it has a job
Yeah,
system.
sounds like it. Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, that was kind of what I think got me into JRPGs, and I think I noticed the same thing I think you're saying, where it seems like lately it's been kind of come around, and Tactics has been the one that's kind of stuck around in a weird way, and a lot of people seem to respect it more, I guess. Where I don't think I'd never really had that same feeling at the time when I would talk Final Fantasy with friends and other game players and stuff. It was very like, oh, that one. I'm a 7 guy or a 6 guy or an 8 guy. I don't think there was many people at the time who were tactics. And
I feel like people form the strongest connections with the numbered entries, but this is the one that's kind of, I wouldn't say remembered most fondly, but remembered as like the most solid title in retrospect.
And
that makes sense.
It's definitely gotten a lot of remakes and remasters and stuff like that. So that's not an accident. And also the world of Avalis, I think, has been revisited 3 or 4 times now, which has to be, if not
it's
the
most, one in. Is that the one in 12 or 10? I forget.
think it's 12, and then they also did like a 12X type one, I think, on Game Boy that they came back to it as well. So
Okay.
I think it's had 2 or 3, which in Final Fantasy is a ton. Very rarely do you get back to a game world. So I'm thinking that's probably a good sign that they kind of as well saw it as at least a popular.
Yeah. It seems like they're making an all new one for 16 as well.
Nice. Yeah.
But I don't know. It looks to me like medieval fantasy, which is not super duper my thing. I was hoping to continue with the like semi-futuristic JRPG batshittery.
Yeah.
But
Don't worry. I mean, I don't think the Final Fantasy series is going anywhere anytime soon. They definitely have a million different ideas, it feels like, now that they want to get in there. But so that probably put me, so going off of the RTS, that probably put me on JRPGs for a while. And I think I had a lot of, like I said, some of these aren't my favorite games. That one definitely would be my favorite game, but I did get into your, Breath of Fires and some of like the more obscure outside of the Final Fantasy ones. Kind of find myself enjoying some aspects of those even more than some of the Final Fantasy stuff. Like Secret of, what's the one with the spear? I don't know, is it Mana or Evermore? One of the two. But I think that was probably my favorite, most played RPG game, kind of that era. Well, maybe probably before that era. I probably came back to that one. But that was kind of where I was for a while, is in those kind of exploration slash, RPGs that offered a little bit more than your standard. Here's the story. Here's where you're going from A to B type stuff.
yeah, it's interesting. That like I don't typically think of you as someone who's super into JRPGs aside from Bravely Default, but like it is something that did influence at least a part of how you consider games
and
today.
I wouldn't even say I am, like, when I played Final Fantasy 15, and I was shocked when I platinumed it. Like, that's kind of how I was with it. Like, I was like, oh,
like, really? I made it through that much of this game?
Yeah. So, I mean, I enjoy them, but it's definitely like, I think I've talked about this before too. I kind of go through like moods, and it's like, damn, it's been a while since I played a JRPG. And I've got a lot of good friends who play a lot of different types of games, and in my social circle. So I say, hey man, give me your top 5 JRPGs I probably missed. And then, a couple new ones that, and that's kind of how I discovered Bravely Default, which is totally my jam when it comes to JRPGs. And it kind of in that same genre of, mix around with jobs and do fun things. And it makes sense that I've kind of jumped onto that series a little bit more than some of the others. So.
Yeah, I find JRPGs are such a varied genre.
Yeah.
That, like, the fact that you like one is not going to mean anything for how you're going to like another.
It's almost become, like, in some ways, it's almost like a meaningless, descriptor at this point. Like, oh, I like JRPGs. Okay, yeah, do you like Final Fantasies or do you like Zelda? Like, whoa, Zelda. And then, like, you start thinking, like, wait a minute. Like, it hits all, then the more you think about it, it's just kind of a meaningless term, really. I think it originally had the idea of a party. I think that was a big part of it, open world-ish at some point and things like that. But I think every single one of those apply to just any RPG these days, where it's a little less of a genre thing and kind of more of a, hey, this is just a type of RPG now.
Yeah, and I get that there are some common kind of storytelling tropes, if you will, to these things, but like the experience I get playing, I don't know, Xenoblade versus Persona is just completely different.
Right.
I don't see any commonality between those games.
And it's why someone who recommends Persona to me and like then recommends to me Xenoblade, like you're saying, it's just like those are completely opposite games to me in my mind.
But I could see. I would flat out say, like, I would not recommend Persona
Right.
for you based on what I know about your tastes, but I would happily recommend Xenoblade to you based on what I know about
Yeah,
your
and
tastes.
it's just so weird because like those are both
Yeah.
theoretically in the same genre, but are they really? I don't know. I mean, anymore it's
God, they're so fucking different from each other. So to name another game that influenced me, and I'm going to talk a bit about JRPGs later, but to bring it back to stuff I played when I was a kid, Roller Coaster Tycoon
Yeah.
was a massive influence on me as a kid. I spent hours playing that game, and it's weird now because I don't really play management sims as an adult. Like I, I've dipped in and out of Planet Coaster and Parkitect, messed around a little bit with them, but never really stuck. But the influence Roller Coaster Tycoon has had on me is not so much in what I play now; it's in what I like now.
right. Yeah.
So, I love theme parks, and that's I would say at least 50% of that is playing a lot of Roller Coaster Tycoon as a kid. Like I adore going on roller coasters and just like soaking in the sights at a
Right.
theme park. And like the 10% of the back of my mind when I'm walking around a theme park is, now how would I implement this in a video game?
This queue line is way too confusing. Yeah, I,
Yeah.
I'm completely with you. Theme parks are kind of my go-to. Like if I just need a vacation, it's almost always a theme park. My wife, she's more of maybe like a cruise or like an island vacation where we just kind of sit there and do nothing. Like, no, I want the theme park experience. So I completely get you, and I think part of it is like it is a fascinating study, and like in some ways, and I think Planet Coaster especially does a good job of this. How do you move people from one place
Yeah.
to another efficiently, even though you're trying to get them to stop at literally everything they pass? Right? It's almost madness trying to figure out how a theme park is designed the way it is.
It's this really interesting fusion of like urban design and visual art and psychology and economics and architecture. Like everything that goes into making a theme park is just fascinating to me.
And you start to hear stuff like people automatically turn right. So like if you start to do things like put things on the left to bring their attention there, because they've already looked at it, they're more likely to stop. And like you start to hear stuff like that, like, that can't be true. And then you go to an amusement park and sure as shit, as soon as everybody gets to that main gate, which way they go right. Because it's just that's the kind of stuff I just love to see in action, because it feels like they put in the game a lot of real world stuff that actually they thought about and considered and made it into the game. So when you see that, it's kind of a cool like different layer of this isn't just for the game. This is how it actually kind of works or does or doesn't work, I guess.
Yeah, and like Roller Coaster Tycoon vastly abstracts from the real world, don't get me wrong, but a lot of the principles of like ride design kind of go through. Like you can't make a ride that really puts a lot of G-force on someone,
Right.
because that's going to be extremely painful for them, right? Or you can't make a ride that has that generates too much nausea. You have to put interesting scenery around a rides to increase thrills. Like this is all principles of how actual rides are designed. Like one thing you've probably noticed about roller coasters is that the turns get sharper even as the roller coaster slows down to kind of maintain the same thrill factor, and you'll have more close calls later in the ride than earlier in the ride.
Right.
Right, and that's just like a principle of roller coaster design that's like a real world thing that has kind of made its way into the video games that simulate this stuff.
And even learning things about like how Disney designs their parks and stuff. There's so many things like sightlines that are so important. So like the idea being you don't see Futureland from Frontierland because it would take you out of the experience almost, right? So like
Yeah,
so little things like that. And then when they decided to build the Star Wars land, it was a big deal. How do we get all these sight lines so that it feels like while you're sitting here and standing here, you're actually in a Star Wars area and you're not in a theme park? And that's what I would say like smaller, maybe not as good amusement parks miss out on, right? Like they don't put
Yeah.
that level of, well, how do we make this so it doesn't feel like you're just sitting here in Six Flags over Atlanta, right? Why are you transported now to whatever their little marketing area is? And that's what Disney gets right and other places get wrong. And I'd argue that the best example of it is probably Harry Potter Land in Universal, because you don't even feel like you're in Universal. You feel like you're there, And
You feel like you're walking down Diagon
yeah,
Alley or whatever.
and the more effort they put into that, the better and better it gets. And that's something, even when I was making theme parks, I'd be like, well, I'm going to put a big hill here because even though the hill tool was the worst, sightlines are important. I don't want you to feel like you're in both areas at once,
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense to have that kind of consistent theming. And it didn't really matter in the first Roller Coaster Tycoon. Just put like a bunch of mismatched scenery wherever, and your guests would eat it up and they'd be like, wow, it's so beautiful. I'm like, I put a fucking Alice in Wonderland licorice statue next to like a tropical cactus. What the fuck are you talking about? But I think later park simulators kind of reward consistent theming. I think Planet Coaster does. I'm not entirely sure. But it's something that we're aware of, and we like try to put back into the games. And so the other reason that Roller Coaster Tycoon has been influential to me is it's kind of influenced the way I think about video games. I think, and I'm going to be a little controversial here, I think a lot of modern writing about video games is almost excessively about the narrative content of games. And don't get me wrong, I think that's really valuable. But it's almost like we kind of devalue talking about systems.
Yeah.
Right? But I'm someone who's really fascinated by systems and also narrative, don't get me wrong. But I'm really fascinated with how gameplay systems kind of work together. Mm-hmm. And that's something that Roller Coaster Tycoon engendered in me.
I think maybe some of it, especially when you talk about the journalism and stuff like that, I think early on, the lazy way to pan a game or to praise a game was to talk about the graphics, right? Or like, oh wow, this is light years ahead of the other console. And then that was for a while. I mean, I hate to even say it, but gaming journalism did suck for a lot of reasons. But that was one of them, because I'd want to talk about different things. He'd be like, oh, this game looks great. Well, yeah, it should look great. It's newer than the one before it, but what's different about it, or what's better? So I think kind of the backlash, or maybe the way around that, has been, instead of talking about those types of things, you start to get into these really weird narrative discussions. What is the game trying to say? And that's also weirdly, it's important, but it's not the most important thing sometimes, because it's not a book, it's not a movie, it's a game. I do want to know.
I think like sometimes it even kind of sidesteps the question of what the game is actually trying to say. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's something games writing doesn't engage with very well, is what is the game actually trying to do?
Right.
Like, that Ebert quote, and I know Ebert has shitty opinions on video games, but that quote is something like, what's important about a movie is not what it's about, but how it's about what it's about.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's not something that, like, games journalism doesn't even get to the first part of it, which is what is the game about.
Because it's hard. I mean, honestly, it's hard sometimes.
It's really hard to talk about this stuff. And I don't pretend that I'm intelligent about it, because I haven't formally studied this stuff. But it is a topic that fascinates me, for sure.
And part of it is because you've got an audience, right? And Ebert knew this, right? In that quote, kind of what he was getting at is like, hey, is Independence Day a good summer blockbuster? It doesn't have to be, Citizen Kane. Is it just a good summer blockbuster to go watch? And that's what it's supposed to be, and it's good at being that, right? And so, I mean, sometimes with games, it's a little bit harder, because is Call of Duty a good shooter? Yeah. Does it do much else? I don't know. Maybe. Depends. Sometimes
I would argue Call of Duty is not a good shooter. But
I mean,
but that's just me.
That's the angle you were looking at a review for. That's probably all you're looking. Hey, does this one have all the cool new guns and let me do, all these set piece battles that I like and stuff like that? And if it checks all those boxes to you, that's a good one, right? But then to somebody else, it's like, well, does this tell any kind of story that's not just that horrible no Russian shit? Well, maybe not, but
I'll actually link to the Destructoid interview of the new Black Ops game. I'll put that in the link dump, because it exactly does what you're what you're alluding to, which is it spends like a whole bunch of paragraphs talking about how the story is really bizarre and should be considered kind of controversial. In retrospect, what we know about American history. And then it's like, well, but that's not, it's almost beside the point to talk about this with a Call of Duty game. So now I'm going to talk about how it actually feels to play this game.
Right.
And I know that this is problematic and controversial, and I don't like it, but that's not what I'm taking away from this game. And then goes on to discuss, the gameplay, the multiplayer, etc., and ends up like pretty positive on the game as a whole, while also saying, yeah, the story is shit, but we know you're not here for the story.
Right. And I think it's good that more games journalists are kind of getting into, whatever you want to call it. Woke or problematic. I think that's a good thing to point stuff like that out.
Yeah, and I am not saying that the review should or shouldn't have discussed that. I think that was the right tack to take, which is saying, this story is fucked up.
Like anything else, I don't want that to be the whole review. So I do like that they got into the other stuff. But I think that is an important way to start kind of looking at, the stuff we're playing and how we're playing it and stuff like that. Because for a while, we've given things a pass, and I think the less of that, the better in some ways. So I'm okay with that. I know a lot of it pisses off a lot of the internet angry nerds, but I don't think there's
let them be pissed off.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. I don't think there's a problem with analyzing why a game does what it does, and then also accounting for like the fact that it's kind of shitty towards some groups of people in some ways that it really doesn't need to be. So yeah.
No, yeah. Like where I'm coming from on this is, I think there's a lot of valuable kind of narratological focused writing on games, and what I find surprising is like people thinking that other kinds of writing shouldn't exist.
Right.
Like, there are people who are like, I only care about the gameplay, and I don't think you should ever write about like these woke story driven reviews. I'm like, well, these things can exist alongside each other. And on the flip side of that, just because IGN wrote a review of some game and gave it an 8 out of 10, and it talks a lot about the gameplay, doesn't mean that's invalid criticism, right? Like that's like buyer's guides are useful to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Especially now when you it feels like sometimes you have to get through that like layer of what is this game actually, supposed to be or do or whatever. Sometimes with some of these games where even though it's the fifth sequel in a series or something, they're trying to do new shit. But how do I quantify that? How do I say this is how this game does good things? Like Valhalla would be a good example. What's the difference in between what Valhalla does and what Origins did? Sometimes you've got to quantify that in a game talk, and you're relying that your audience at least has some experience with it. But
you kind of do have to talk about systems at that point. And it's kind of like why I've gravitated a lot towards YouTubers like Super Bunny Hop, Thor High Heels, Nakey Jakey, people like that who like really delve into how the game systems interact with each other and then kind of in turn play off the narrative aspects of the experience. Like that's kind of the analysis I'm looking for nowadays.
Same. Yeah.
So what else has influenced you?
Oh, Halo. You knew we were going to get to this, but I'm glad
we're going to talk about Halo.
Yeah. Halo is such like even if you just consider like the sheer hours I spent with it, but kind of going from the RTS to the JRPG, kind of feel like in some ways I kind of doubled down a little too hard on that JRPG part, and I kind of started to feel that like that kind of call back to social gaming, because I was thinking about playing, hey, when I used to play Warcraft with my buddies or other games, it felt so much cooler, to kind of be sitting around and stuff, and I could really kind of feel myself with JRPGs kind of getting into that like almost that loner gamer mentality in a way, do you know what I mean? Where it's just like I would just come home and just grind, and then Halo just hit at the exact perfect time. I've talked about this before on the Avocado, just kind of in general. My school in particular wasn't very cliquey. We were we were on a military base, so I think that played a big part of it. And so like, your lifelong friends would move at a given notice, and, athletes were star athletes, but they might be gone the next week or stuff like that. So it was kind of a less cliquey school than I think American movies would have you think it was. So one of the weird experiences I had was when all of a sudden everyone I knew started to start playing video games, and it was a little thing called Halo, and we would have like the equivalent of, hey, everybody, we're gonna have a party at, this house. Everybody bring your Xbox. I have 3 TVs. I'm gonna bring them down to the living room. We're gonna play Halo all night. It was a different kind of like just bonding in a way
Yeah.
that like I had not really had with gaming, honestly, at the time. It felt very cool. I was sitting next to the popular kids and the smokers and all the rest, and we were all just sitting there playing Halo. And at the time I was kind of like a skater kind of kid, and like it was almost like you were like the champion of your group in a weird way, right? So you'd have all these different like social stratas there, and everybody's sitting there like trying to frag out on Blood Gulch, and like it was almost, man, the skater's got a good player, he's over there, and then the jock's got this one guy, he came from nowhere, but he knows his sniper. It was a really weird social time just in general, and I mean 2000s get remembered for a lot of stuff, but I've never really seen that in any kind of movie or anything else, where it was just like literally people in my school would just get together and play video games, and like that was bizarre to me at the time, especially because I was like, I knew they weren't playing Warcraft or Final Fantasy or anything. It was more of a cultural thing, but it felt awesome, and like GameStops would have tournaments in store, and people really like were into that mindset. So even just beyond the game being as good as it was and as monumental as it was, everything that kind of sprung up around Halo to me at the time felt really cool. It felt like, like you sometimes talk about like the gaming community, and like it's just this real negative, toxic place. And there was some of that in Halo, but honestly, at the time, there was a lot less of it because the people you played right there in the room. You know what I mean? And like that,
like you're not going to be a huge dipshit to someone you're going to see at school
exactly.
tomorrow, right? Yeah, and that's a lot of what I miss about social experiences playing games is, in adulthood after university, I moved, like I did my undergrad in Canada, then moved to the United States for grad school and subsequently for work. I don't see most of the people that I hung out with in undergrad, and like those people were people with whom we would sit on the couch at their place, and we'd play Super Smash Bros. Or Mario Kart or whatever all night long, and that was just how I bonded with people when I was younger. And it's weird not having that experience now, even though it was so formative to me as like a teenager.
And that's why I think in a way I'll always have like kind of a soft spot for like the Madden gamers or the Call of Duty games or whatever you want to call them, because they're playing a social experience at the same time. Do you know what I mean? And that maybe that's like they're holding on to that time when like, hey, this is when I play with all my friends and this is the most fun thing. I mean, it's like I talk about my brother all the time, and that's gaming to him is Madden, like, and Tony Hawk. But like, if you told him, hey man, there's a new whatever, he don't care, but that's because that's what he played when
they made Portal 3. Like that wouldn't.
No, he wouldn't even be interested in Half-Life 3. So that's kind of an experience that I think that certain people have, and it's not a bad thing. It's just a different thing, and I get it because I was there at some of that time when that was what gaming was like, and in one way it was a better time in some ways, honestly. You didn't go on Xbox Live and have to hear people say awful shit to you, or like it was much more of a type of thing where it was like, yeah, I'm going to get with my friends, we're going to play this game, and we're going to have a good time, and drink a few beers.
We're going to eat Ruffles and trash talk each other. Like, it was something that I have like a lot of nostalgia for. And like, I mean, I do have to admit, we are both dudes, and that does generate like its own set of privileged experiences. So like we are coming at this from this perspective, but at the same time, like it's still, I think, a friendlier environment to be in than one where you're just constantly hearing people like hurling slurs at each other.
Yeah. I mean, it don't feel great to be on any side of that. Even just when you're hearing it happen, like it is one of those things. Like, man, I hate that this is what I have to even. I
hate that other people are dealing with this. Yeah.
But yeah, and I think that at the time, especially with Halo, it was kind of like the you got a lot of the promise that like maybe never quite got delivered on. but it felt like at a time in gaming when I guess more than anything, you felt like you could just have a good time, and it wasn't competitive, and it was, it was competitive, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't like, nobody cared about your kill death ratio in Halo. And the people that you played with were your friends, and you'd hang out with them, and you talk about what you did that weekend and when this next time you're going to play.
And that's kind of the experience I've had with Halo, which is I ran through the campaigns solo, but I've also been running through the campaigns co-op with buddies. And I mean, we just fuck around. We like kill each other on purpose and shit. And that's like obviously not how you're supposed to play the game, but it's also like it's just a fun time to kind of get back to where we were when we were all on the same couch in college.
Right.
So yeah, I definitely see that as something that like influences the way I kind of want to enjoy games. If that makes sense.
Yeah, same thing. Like, it's not like I wish we could go back, because I mean, there's never really a going back, but it does make me think that, like, hey, we don't have to accept that, oh yeah, it's just going to be toxic no matter who you are. That's just what games are. Like, nah, they didn't start that way. It really wasn't always that way. And people who say otherwise are kind of just they're giving kind of excuses for bad behavior. Sometimes I think that just the people don't really necessarily need them. But why excuse
Yeah, it's kind of like, that's the internet.
Yeah, when I hear people say stuff like, I think there was like a meme about it a couple weeks ago, and it was like, oh, you never would have survived in a Modern Warfare 2 lobby, And I'm like, yeah, well, a Modern Warfare 2 lobby shouldn't have ever existed in the first place. That shouldn't be a standard you hold people by, like, oh yeah, you should love that level of harassment, But yeah, I don't know. I miss that, and I think it was cool, and that's kind of the time that when I think back to most about, it's always those like Halo days of just like playing, and I get to have them now, kind of, when I play with my kids and stuff, and I'm introducing them to stuff. There's a fair amount of that where I'm like, hey guys, let me show you Halo 2. And here's how to do this map, this mission and stuff, and my kids pretend they love it at least. So, yeah. I
mean, it's the kind of thing that they can get into with their friends and their peers as they grow older.
And Halo's good for that, because
it's social.
You're not shooting. I mean, you're shooting people in the face, but you're not shooting a person in the face. So there's a little bit of that, when you're playing it, where it doesn't feel, as bad for letting my kids play as I might,
like a Call of Duty kind of thing. Yeah, there's definitely kind of that level of stylization and remove from like shooting fellow humans. Mm-hmm. I think the reason, like, even like some of the military trappings, which can feel a little awkward or problematic in a military shooter, like in Halo, when you're just in a sci-fi universe as a space marine, it doesn't feel like icky at all.
And also, it's like you're not at war with the other humans, like that's all been solved. Humanity's at peace. Everything's great back on Earth. Now let's go fix this shit. Like I think part of that helps that kind of as well.
For sure. So speaking of shooters, one that really, really influenced me, Deus Ex. Yeah. So I mean, calling it a shooter is a little bit misleading. I think most people nowadays would call it more like an immersive sim or even an RPG. And for me, I hadn't really ever played that kind of game before when I first played Deus Ex. I don't think I'd ever played an RPG to completion. I'd never played an immersive sim before. I was used to thinking of video games as like, here are a bunch of levels, you got a bunch of lives, may or may not tell a story, have fun, go mad. Right? And like playing this game for the first time, we're like, oh, you have an inventory to manage, and there are different approaches, and the story's branching, and your decisions matter. Like, I'd never had that experience before.
Yeah.
Until I played Deus Ex. And like having this kind of level of customizability in gameplay, like how you upgrade your character and having to make tough choices of what kind of augmentations you want to put in your body. That was all new to me. And the thing about the original Deus Ex is, I mean, like graphically, it's not a looker, let's be real. but I think by and large it still holds up.
Yeah, and
Like, it's a game that you can still pick up and enjoy for its storytelling and its gameplay systems and how they all work together.
it's talking about systems. I really feel like that was a game that was built around a very interesting system that was basically like, we're going to let you figure this one out. We're going to let you figure out how you get from point A to point B and what you want to do. And I mean, not everything in the game was you were able to do, but there was a lot of options where you could talk things out, which was, at the time, like everything was interacted with a gun, basically,
Yeah.
So when they started to kind of give you the idea, like, hey, maybe you don't got to shoot every single thing you come across with a health bar in this game. Maybe you can figure out other ways to get past this.
Yeah, you can sneak past things, you can blow up things, you can rewire robots to attack the enemy.
And writing that into the game felt revolutionary at the time, because it usually the experience you would kind of have with a lot of those games was, well, hey, let me try to do this one weird thing. It probably won't work, but I want to try to tell this guy that I'm not going to take this mission. Because like, how does every RPG kind of like, oh, hey, will you go help me save my lost puppy? Yeah, sure, I might as well, because it's going to give me experience. If I say no, I just don't get anything. So of course I'm going to go do it. But in this game, it was kind of like, well, you know what? You don't want to do something, don't do it. See what happens. And that was kind of refreshing. It felt a little less like I was doing, to be the chosen one and have to go save a cat is sometimes kind of annoying. Sometimes, So Deus Ex kind of writing itself into places where you could do what you wanted to felt kind of fresh.
I still think one of the best accommodations that game makes for your choices. I'm going to spoil something major in Deus Ex right now, but if you haven't played it yet, what are you doing with your life? So there's one part of the game where Ana Navarra, one of the fellow augmented people at UNATCO, tells you to kill a rebel leader in cold blood. And you can kill the leader, in which case Navarro is like, oh wow, great job, thank you. You can refuse, in which case the guy survives, or I can't remember if the guy survives or Navarro kills him for you, but that pisses her off. Or you can do the secret third option, which they do not tell you can do, which is you can just kill her.
Yeah.
And that was revolutionary to me, that you could kill her and then cover up the crime.
Yeah.
And only one other person would ever know.
Right. I mean, yeah, that today seems like something like, I mean, even still in a game, that would be kind of cool if you could do that, right? But it wouldn't seem as revolutionary as it did at the time, because at the time that was like, whoa. I mean, it was the kind of thing you probably only found out because someone read it somewhere and told you about it.
Yeah.
It wasn't something you probably did on your own. But then when you found out about it, it was like, well, what else can I do in this game? Because all of a sudden it opens up everything. And then that's usually people have that playthrough of Deus Ex where it's just like they literally do that. They try to break the game in fun ways.
Yeah, they try to fuck around. Like everybody who's played Deus Ex has had the experience of running into the women's bathroom, getting told off for it. Yeah, like you could be like a Boy Scout and play that game. You can fuck around, and the game will accommodate that, which nowadays seems like old hat, but back in the year 2000, this was fucking revolutionary.
It still feels good to go back and play the older Deus Exes and stuff. It's not as revolutionary like we're saying, but it definitely has a feel of a game that was like so ahead of its time that you're not even sure that people understood how good what they were playing was at the time. Even,
I mean, it has been like, even for a game that maybe people kind of forget about how revolutionary it was, I will say it's been influential.
Right? Yeah.
It's like, it is the reason that we still have immersive sims today. Because your Vampire the Masquerades or Anachronoxes, they sold. They were minor hits, but Deus Ex was huge,
right?
And it's influenced so much of modern shooter and immersive sim and RPG design, and even the way like branching narrative exists in games now is in large part due to the influence of Deus Ex.
I just wish the sequels had kept some of it up, but just
Yeah, I still think Invisible War is a garbage game. I'm sorry, it sucks. I know I'm more positive on Mankind Divided than you, but like I think the only one of the sequels that really measures up to the original is Human Revolution. Mankind Divided, in the gameplay department, I think holds up, but the narrative department kind of falls short. Like I think the racial allegory is extremely clumsy, and they really should have stuck with the more like class and labor type stuff that they were alluding to in Human Revolution. I think that would have been a more interesting story. Invisible War is just cynical conspiratorial mess. I don't even know what to say about it.
I think Invisible War, I mean, I would be interested to see how that holds up. I haven't replayed it in forever, but I would be interested to see how that one holds up on a replay, because I kind of feel like that one did catch a lot of flack for just not being Deus Ex 2 in some ways, you know? It was trying to tell something a little bit different, but yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested to kind of see what I think about it on a replay, if I can ever get that thing up and running.
What I'd say about it is, like, the first Deus Ex is conspiratorial but hopeful.
Right.
The second Deus Ex is conspiratorial and paranoid, and also hopeless, and really cynical. And I think it, for the time which it came out, it felt appropriate. But nowadays, that's the kind of shit you'd associate with like Alex Jones.
Yeah. And what I was gonna
it doesn't play well.
What I was gonna say too, what I remember kind of being is kind of like that edgy Matrix bullshit that kind of was everywhere for a while. You know what I mean? Like that whole like, it's all a lie. We're all, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
It seemed like that was the shortcut for credibility for some reason, for some like games, movies, books, just in general. This whole like, well, we're just going to tell people, you know, everything you know is a lie. Ha ha ha. What how clever are we? You know.
It also didn't respond to your gameplay decisions that well.
I remember that.
Like, I think I've told this. There's like this cult or church or whatever in the game that you are supposed to do missions for, but you can ignore them entirely. Mm-hmm. So every time I like never visited that church during my entire playthrough, but people still treated me like I was working with them.
Yeah.
And that like it was so out of step with how I played the game that I was like, this is not responding to my choices at all.
Yeah, they try to do a lot more with dialogue in that game, I noticed. That was and they kind of I think you get to that point where you kind of almost wrote yourself into a hole where it's like, well, these characters have to say something because, you know, you just walked into the room. So they would say shit. Like, I remember, this might have been just me or how I played or something, but I remember one of the characters talking about an event that hadn't happened yet. And it kept, like, blowing my mind. I was like, wait, did that happen and I missed it? Or, like, but then I remember it was, like, kind of like a known bug or something, like some trigger in a quest somewhere. But it just was so jarring at the time. And, like, I even remember it to this day. But, you know, Deus Ex is a complicated series. I would say that for you always get these games that almost deliver more on promise. You almost get more excited about the promise of the game than the game itself. Like, I think Fable might be in that kind of list for me. You know, but Deus Ex kind of is one of those games lately that I think there's so much potential and there's so much, you know, stuff you can do with just the series and the game and the design and everything. But I mean, I don't know. The past two have just been such misses for me in a weird way, kind of in a different way for both of them. That I don't know if it's Deus Ex that I don't like or what they've been doing with it that I don't like. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. For me, Human Revolution was fantastic, but I think a lot of people, like one of the main criticisms of it in some circles is that it's a lot more about transhumanism than it is about social and political issues, other social and political issues. Like the first Deus Ex is like, once you get to the conclusion, it's what kind of society do you want to have? Whereas Human Revolution is laser focused on transhumanism and its implications for labor.
Right. And it's probably better because of that focus, because that's the most direct focus. And you can do stuff with that, where it's like you don't have to get into some of the messy issues, historical and real world and politics and stuff like that, because you're dealing with something that kind of but doesn't really exist just yet. So you can posit some ideas and be like, well, they're going to have to figure this out. How does a person who has been augmented to have a back that can lift 1,000 pounds deal with getting their back broken, by a machine that was supposed to help their job be easier or something, But
and these are exactly the kinds of issues that Human Revolution tackles that a lot of people were not as enthralled
Right.
by as the original Deus Ex. And then Mankind Divided just, I think, misfired on its... I think the broad outline of the plot is good. I just think it misfired on its themes. I don't buy the racial allegory.
Yeah.
I think it's really clumsy. And whereas previous Deus Ex games were a lot more open-ended, they're like, here's the evidence, let the player draw their conclusions. There's no question to be asked in Mankind Divided. Is racism bad?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, racism is bad, obviously.
Yeah. And it kind of
What do you want me to say?
puts you in a lot more black and white scenarios that I think makes the game worse off than it would be normally, because like you're saying, of course I'm not going to decide with racism, whereas I think we talk a lot about Ashley being a space race as a Mass Effect. At least that adds a nuance to it, which is where humanity doesn't have the power. They're not part of the power structure in that world, they're being basically led on. So I think that's kind of, you can do that type of narrative interestingly. You just got to be smart about it. And I don't think that there's anybody who looks at what they were trying to do in Deus Ex and be like, oh yeah, well, I mean, clearly, there's some nuance to be had here. No, it's pretty straightforward, honestly.
I mean, I think, I don't want to undersell it, because there is all the stuff they built up in Human Revolution, and that still applies to Mankind Divided, about how a lot of people, especially in the lower classes, were augmented against their will, because they needed it for their jobs to stay competitive, right? But that kind of should have been the focus, not
superhuman,
just
super
straight up
spy,
racism.
and how does he interact? It's weird because he doesn't have the touchstone that a lot of the other people in that game that you run into have, which is he's not just augmented, he's the cream of the crop of augmentation. Do you know what I mean? So when you get somebody who tries to figure out, hey, do I get this black market half-assed augmentation so I can keep doing my shitty job, or do I basically just go out and ride in the streets until they make my job not so shitty? That's an interesting story, but you're not going to get it through the eyes of the yellow eyes.
You don't really experience it on the one hand. On the other hand, I think what they do a pretty good job of is you're very much the exception that proves the rule. And I use that in the correct sense of the fact that they allow you is, and the fact that they have to specifically grant you permission is proof of how they treat the other augmented people. So I get that they illustrated that really well, but you never really experienced the struggles of someone who was in Human Revolution, essentially forced to be addicted to neuropozyne to even live, because they needed to get augments to do their jobs, and now they've been fucking fired because they went berserk. Right? That's all just kind of backgrounded in favor of the more generic racism narrative, and it really doesn't do the game any favors.
And to make it even worse, once they start to get into it, the game just ends. Right? Just kind of yep, you solved it.
I don't know. I've always thought the ending to me was satisfying, but it really demanded a sequel that it feels like we're never going to get. I would be fine. I'm 100% fine with that ending, knowing another game is on the way. Knowing that Deus Ex got effectively shelved as a franchise because we need to make the fucking Avengers game, that annoys me now in retrospect. Fucking Avengers, man. All right, what's another game that influenced you?
I think this one is maybe the most, I think maybe gamer spaces or whatever you want to call it. I think it's maybe the most controversial, but it's Fallout 3. It's hard for me to not put the original Fallout for, cred or whatever you want to go with, but there's just something about Fallout 3 that hits every Pavlovian or whatever response, to a game that I could possibly have. Um, I've experienced open world, RPGs before, but there's something about the way Fallout 3 just kind of handled everything all at once, and then basically wrapped it up in a nice, neat little package that was very consumer friendly. I thought for such a complex game like that, the average person could approach that game and, legitimately make it start to finish. Um, it built on a lot of interesting ideas. I think that the Fallout series kind of started with, you know,
Yeah.
and I think it made it clear that, like, hey, this is a fucked up world. This isn't, this isn't happy 1950s. This is fake happy 1950s, and there's a lot of bad shit going on, and you've only been seeing half of it up until now. So I think there's a lot of interesting shit there that Fallout 3 maybe never really was appreciated kind of at the time, because I think the knee jerk is New Vegas. And I think New Vegas generally is a better experience, like start to finish. But I think it's also hard to take away what 3 does, because 3 had so many aspects that obviously made it not just being, but I think
I feel like there's very little New Vegas DNA
past the
in subsequent
yes,
games.
exactly.
Like, except for maybe what was that game? The Outer Worlds, which, I mean, being also made by Obsidian, that makes sense. But I haven't really played anything other than New Vegas that felt like New Vegas.
Right, and I think that's an okay thing. I mean, Obsidian's been their own thing for a while, so and they what they do best is the small stories, right? The intimate tales of friends and things like that. Your companions felt so much better. The story between Mr. House and the endings were a lot more satisfying, I would say, than 3. But I think 3 sets a lot of groundwork for kind of what I think now open world RPGs have basically become, right?
Yeah.
And we have certain expectations now, I think, that I think Fallout kind of put forward. And the other thing, I think, this is going to sound probably worse, but I hated the top down. I hated the idea that it was even considered that they were going to go back to top down. And I find, talking about systems and elements and stuff, I find VATS to be such an elegant solution to such a shitty problem that so many games really hadn't cracked up until then. And it's that you want to have, a little bit of randomness in your fights. You want to make the player not feel godly, but feel powerful. And you want to make battles not just be boiled down into a Twitch fest. And I think that VATS was such, like, hit every single one of those elements so perfectly that, like, whoever designed VATS or came up with the idea that VATS was going to be their solution, I mean, seriously, they deserve whatever.
They nailed it. Yeah.
They got it on every level. And I think that VATS coming around now in a lot of RPGs. I mean, let's face it, the Witcher time and all the other stuff. I mean, that's what it's all VATS. And that solution that they came up with has fixed RPGs kind of in general in a lot of ways. And I think it was a smart one. And I think that 3 solves problems that people didn't even know 1 and 2 had in terms of the narrative and the structure. And I mean, the writing on 1 and 2 is exceptional, don't get me wrong, but like there's not like a lot of thematic consistency that I think 3 kind of brings in, which is, hey, the world was actually secretly fucked up and we kind of pretended it wasn't. So now go out and fix it, but you're in charge of whatever you do to the world, basically,
I think kind of the thing that the new Fallouts get across very well is that, I mean, I can't speak to 4 because I haven't played it, but the thing that they get across really well is the, like, kind of the wholesome Americana's satirical theme that runs through the games is, like, very much a cover for how fucked up everything is, and we're still trying to pretend things aren't fucked up even after the nuclear apocalypse.
Right, yeah. Like, oh yeah, it's
we're still clinging on to this weird, like, these like wholesome aesthetics that make no sense.
And then I think that what 3 does is they basically go through every Fallout sacred cow and it's like, yeah, Nuka-Cola, guess what? They sucked. Robco, guess what? They sucked. You know what I mean? And it's kind of funny that, like, you go through like a whole game basically like destroying Fallout sacred cows when the entire internet hated that 3 even existed in a way. I remember there was a website, I think it was No Mutants Allowed, that was like very loud and very angry about, this isn't my Fallout. It was very juvenile at the time because no way was an isometric Fallout at that time going to have any kind of traction in gaming spaces, right? It was
I mean, can you imagine if GTA was still isometric?
exactly.
Like, fuck, could you imagine if you still drove on the left in
Yeah,
GTA?
I mean, so they were going to have to do something with it, you know. And
Yeah.
3 to me is the best of so many different solutions that I'm surprised that it didn't get fucked with coming out the door. To be honest with you, that it came through so good. But yeah, I really enjoyed my time spent with Fallout 3, and I think that it's almost as important a game as you can have these days. That it maybe in some ways doesn't get the credit it should for being what it was, but
Yeah. Like, I can't say it's a game that I, like, super enjoyed playing what I've played of it, but I recognize how influential it has been in,
yeah,
like, how the open world genre has
right.
evolved.
And so when we're
sure.
talking about games that influence, it's like there's so many things from Fallout 3 now. I just straight up expect, crafting.
Yeah.
I expect a crafting in my open world RPG. I mean, I think most people would say that, like I want to be able to find a bunch of nuts and bolts on the ground and do something with them that's cool and build something. And little things like that, settlement building, I think now has kind of become a staple of the series. And I think you're seeing that more and more. I mean, Valhalla has settlement building, so I think that you're going to see more and more influence of 3 now. That I'm not saying that it's easier to make an open world RPG, but it's definitely become something that,
Like, the template is there now because other people have done
and
it.
players kind of aren't so like, what is this? You expect me to go to all these little blips and blops on the map and do stuff? Like, no way, this is too much. Now it's like, yeah, I understand the framework of an open RPG. Give it to me, and I'm going to expect a lot of shit that's been there since Fallout 3 to still be there. So I think that's why I consider it just such an influential game.
Like,
And
it's even, like, bled back into JRPGs.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, like, it made its way into Xenoblade Chronicles X, which is like you build a settlement in that game, and you run around a massive open world. Like, even Breath of the Wild, which takes its cue from Skyrim. Where did Skyrim take its cues from?
yeah, Fallout 3.
Fallout 3.
And it's why the infamous Fallout jank is a thing. And it's Skyrim jank, or it's just Bethesda jank, and it can be tough to deal with. But Fallout 3 was also from a personal perspective. When I sat down, I said, I'm going to learn enough about this console that I'm never going to get stuck in a command again. And I literally would teach myself every console command. I mean, from how to give myself lockpicks and cheat, all the way down to, hey, this NPC didn't spawn, so I'm going to do a place at me, put this NPC here, advance his quest. You know what I mean? And I really, in a weird, perverse way, actually enjoyed doing that stuff with Fallout, and the creation engine being so fucking broke that, as a player, it's like you have to fix it, you have to make it work. And then on top of that, Fallout also has the amazing modding scene that did one step further almost in every way, and not just fixed the game, but improved on it in so many ways. I have a friend who's to this day working on a mod for Fallout that he's been working on for maybe 5 years, and it's provided him with almost a source of income in some ways, because he does make money off the mod, but more than anything, it's just given him a hobby, for this many years. So the modding community, I think, is something when you talk about, one of the concerns with Bethesda being bought, hey, is Microsoft going to support the modding still? Sure sounds like it. But when we talk about what do we expect from games, I think more and more, if you're doing open world RPG and I want to put on a Game of Thrones shield, hey, your game should probably support that, And I think that's kind of where Fallout's real, true, influences are going to come.
Yeah, and especially in Bethesda games, the stuff they mod into them is fantastically hilarious. What one of the most popular mods is a fucking Thomas the Tank Engine boss. Which
shit,
I think is
man.
hilarious.
Let people have their fun, and I don't know. The more I think about Fallout just as almost like an experiment, the more that series just kind of showed that the technology maybe not 100% there, but people do want to do this kind of insane shit with their games, and if you let them, they're going to do fun stuff, and you're going to be impressed and surprised and maybe sometimes horrified. But the potential is there to do cooler things with the game than you might think.
That Thomas haunts my nightmares.
Exactly.
For sure. Speaking of RPGs that influenced us, the one I want to bring up is one I alluded to earlier. It's Shin Megami I can say words. Shin Megami Tensei Persona 4. So I'm just going to come out and say it. I was not a weeb until I played this game.
Wow.
This game is the game that made me a weeb.
Gateway.
Yeah, this is my gateway to weebery. So I played it, I think 6 years ago now, and I literally had not watched anime in a decade. After, like, I think I stopped watching either Digimon or Monster Rancher when I was a teenager, and I just didn't watch anime all through high school and undergrad. And then when I was in grad school, I bought a PS3 off a roommate who was moving out, and a lot of people just kept recommending Persona 4 to me. I was like, fine, I'll fucking play this game. And it turned out that not only did I enjoy the game, it was a gateway into basically Japanese gaming, which I just hadn't experienced in years. So before that, I dismissed turn-based combat as boring, and then I realized, hey, wait, turn-based combat can be interesting and strategic, especially if you have to kind of strategize across battles and figure out, well, okay, I can use all my MP or whatever on this one guy and make that fight really easy, but it's going to fuck me over for the next 5 fights and things like that. I didn't realize that these kinds of combat systems could be rewarding and deep. And then it was kind of like all these tropes and this kind of storytelling style got me back into anime after like a decade away. And I still wouldn't say I'm like super duper huge into anime. Like I'll watch, 1 or 2 shows each season. I'm not like one of those people who's like, I have to watch 8 shows and keep up with all the memes, which like a lot of anime fans are like. But it's been nice to be able to get back into a pastime that I had almost abandoned and that I felt had abandoned me.
It's interesting how like that distilled experience kept your interest in some ways, because I wonder like in some ways, like if you get too much like drips and drabs of, I don't know what you'd call it, maybe modern JRPG elements or something like that, maybe like having that just all at once and not having experienced it into it was better. Because I think some of my reactions have been maybe a little bit opposite with some of the kind of JRPG-ish tropes that I've run into.
Yeah, because it's like you've built up whatever the opposite of tolerance is. Like your patience runs out. And like I totally get that. I would say it helps that Persona 4 is fucking good, right? Like if you'd introduced me back into JRPGs with, I don't know, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, I would have just fucking hated the genre. And I really don't like that game after having wasted 50 hours on it this year. But like it helps that while it's like it's distinctly Japanese. Like it's not a game that tried to super appeal to the West or anything. It is distinctly telling a story about life in small town Japan. But the appeal is in how it tells that story. It's, I still think, one of the best mystery stories in gaming. And it's really, really hard to replicate that kind of storytelling in like pretty much any other story you could tell. The way it unfolds, it's because it's not just the way it unfolds doesn't just like tell the story of the mystery. The way the mystery unfolds ties into the broader themes that the game explores. And explaining exactly how it does that would really spoil the game. But let's just say that, like, kind of jumping from culprit to culprit or conclusion to conclusion is kind of one of the things that the story is about. Okay. And so it takes the structure of your common whodunit type stories and makes a story about the structure.
Okay. That's interesting then.
Yeah, it's one of like People love Persona 5, and don't get me wrong, it's a pretty good game. But Persona 5 is very straightforward in its structure. Like, its structure has nothing to do with the story it's telling. Persona 4 is, I think, it's a really holistic game in that the way it tells a story, the way you develop the characters, the way you go through the dungeons, it speaks a lot to what the game is trying to say.
Okay.
So, again, I caution against people playing this game because it's super duper long. Like, this is 100 hours of your life that you'll never get back. But as far as how I now think about what I want out of a JRPG and what I want out of video game stories, I think Persona 4 is kind of unparalleled, and I'm kind of always chasing that high now of a game that will satisfy me narratively that way, or an anime that will tell a story that good. It's kind of like nothing will ever match that in some ways.
That's how I feel about a lot of games that kind of, I think it's not on my top list. It should be, but I felt like having 2 Warcrafts would be ridiculous. But WoW was kind of like that same thing. I could never chase that high, and I just like at some point you just give up, right? Like it's hard to figure out how to make things feel new, right? After you've experienced something. And that's always kind of the toughest thing in a game to figure out, I guess, is how do I make this thing that is relatable enough to players that get it, but also new enough that, they enjoy whatever they've been doing, and they don't feel like I'm just making up as I go along, kind of.
Yeah, and like I've played games that were better at specific things than Persona 4, right? Like I've played JRPGs with better combat. I've played games with better stories, but I've never played like that whole package again.
Yeah.
And
it's tough because, like you're saying, you're always chasing something that may or may not even exist.
Doesn't exist. Yeah.
When you feel like, well, if I ever find this thing again, like I'll be happy, but yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, like, and this is not to shit on Persona 5, but that game does not it's nowhere near as satisfying as Persona 4, even though it does so much stuff better than Persona 4. There's something about it where it's just like, there's something about that it just kind of misses the mark. And, like, I don't know, maybe one day Persona 6 will measure up and tell this really satisfying story that complements the gameplay structure and the story structure.
Not today.
Not today. So what's the last game that influenced you?
I went all over the place on this one, but I had to go with Dragon Age Origin. This was kind of the rebirth for me of, we talked about, for me, like JRPGs, I guess, kind of open world RPGs. And then Dragon Age Origin kind of is where we put everything together. It's the most distilled gaming experience I think I can imagine, where everything just works on so many levels, and it pulls everything together, and they tie it in with stuff at the time that was insanely fresh feeling, stuff like romances, and you can piss party members off to the point they leave, and a story that was a whole new world that felt like I knew it but I didn't, where I wanted to learn more about the world almost constantly.
Yeah, there's enough familiarity, everybody knows your elves and your dwarves, right? But the political intrigue that they set up is extremely unique to that universe, and I think most fantasy universes have a lot of trouble setting up the same kind of rich lore.
And it's the kind of where everything makes sense, but you don't know it, and that's the hardest thing to figure out, right? Yeah, I get why these dwarves are a bunch of asshole noblemen. Yeah. And then it slowly starts to make sense, and it's kind of it takes that dark fantasy take almost, where hey, not everything Tolkien wrote would have been perfect. There would have been issues with all this shit, but it does it in a way that doesn't feel edgy just to be edgy, right? It does cool stuff. It talks about hey, elves, they can live forever. You know what? That would make them really great slaves, and then you start like, wow, that's really fucking dark when you think about it, right? And then the game runs with that, and it's like humanity has basically ground the elves into the dust to the point where like they're not even allowed to do some of their like basic rituals at this point, you know. And then how do you deal with that? How do you deal with humanity kind of being the bad guy to everyone, but also the saviors in some weird ways, you know? Not I can't remember. I don't remember what the exact ages were in Tolkien, right? But like, you know, there's like the age of dwarves, the age of elves, the age of man, or whatever, right? So I feel like we're playing a game set in the age of man, where the elves have kind of moved on, the dwarves have kind of just locked themselves up, right? And then now, what does it look like when you got men in charge? And it's fucked up, right? You know, magic is this old crazy thing, and you know, you got mages and basically anti-mages, and all the stuff that they can do with it is just like they build, and then they build on top of what they built. And I know 2 might have felt like a bit of a misstep, and people will have like different feelings about Inquisition, but I think it's been very consistent as a series, and it's done some really cool stuff that I don't think they've made a misstep all the way just yet. And the biggest worry I have is that BioWare loses out on Dragon Age. I mean, Mass Effect, I feel like told a full story at this point, you know. I don't feel like Dragon Age is even close to telling the story that they want to tell. So it's how do you build on top of it from here, though? I don't know, because at this point, players have made so many choices that have come back in so many interesting ways. I think that's going to be the hard part. But the other thing I want to say that like really influenced me and kind of put me on and off certain games is I think Dragon Age does a good job of not giving player the illusion of choice. Actual meaningful choices happen in Dragon Age. You know what I mean? Where it does matter which one you pick. It's not that it doesn't go to the same spot regardless. And I think that's one of those things that a lot of other games, like maybe some of the Telltale ones especially, have gone in directions where it's like, you make all these important choices, but then none of them end up mattering at all.
I think with Telltale especially, what the first season of The Walking Dead did well was, you always kind of converged to the same point, but it wasn't obvious that the game was making you do that. But then in subsequent seasons, especially season 2, like you would make a choice and then it would immediately be invalidated.
Right. Yeah, they just kill that character, or they just say, oh, you know what, actually, you chose that. We're going to go
actually,
here.
No, we're not going to listen to you. And it's like, why did I fucking bother to make that choice, right? And by the end of it, I was just so cynical about the experience that I was just like, fuck it, I'm abandoning everything. And I chose like the lone wolf ending, which is apparently not the one you're supposed to choose.
But then after a while, like you're just playing quick time simulator of the game because none of the choices matter, you know?
And that's like that's what bothers me. It's like, if you can create the illusion that my choices matter, I don't care. But when you're like undermining everything I do within 5 minutes of me making that choice, then I'm gonna start trying to game the system rather than like feel immersed in the narrative. And what Dragon Age does so well is, even when your choices would converge, they always like pay off the consequences of those choices.
It's almost like there's not like a negative way, like who you choose to marry or who is just a choice you made. It doesn't mean like, you know, oh, you get the bad ending, right? The bad ending concept is one I absolutely hate. It's the most frustrating thing me in games, that like you made a choice and that was the wrong choice. And now you get the bad ending. Dishonored, I think, did that for me in a really crappy way, and I ended up hating the game for that, you know. So I don't like the idea that you can make the wrong choice and it ruins the ending. I think it should influence the ending, but it shouldn't just be like, yep, there was a good ending and a bad ending because 6 chapters ago you told this guy this thing, you know. Nope, bad ending for you. And Dragon Age and Mass Effect, to a fair extent, but I think Dragon Age does it better. Does a much better way of saying your choice was your choice. It wasn't good or wasn't bad. It was your choice, and this is how that kind of plays out in this game world. And then
it's like a tiny bit of that in Inquisition, where if you don't make the exact right dialogue choices, Liliana turns into the murder pope.
Which is fun. I mean, it's still a good choice, you know, like. But I do like the concept that they have of either like feeding into like the happy-go-lucky nature of Alistair, for example, or hardening him and making him be like, look, man, this shit's serious. People are dying, you know. You got to get your shit together if you're going to be the king. I guess spoiler, but you know what I mean. So I think
Whatever, we can spoil Dragon Age. It's 10 years old. Go play it.
but that's what I kind of think is like when they give you that opportunity and then they let it play out in two different ways. So now not only can Alistair be your love interest, well, past that, what kind of love interest is he? Is he, happy-go-lucky, feel good to be around teddy bear, or is he like, I have responsibilities. I'm the fucking king of this whole place, and people are gonna die if I do the wrong thing. Which both I think you can make cases for both of them. Honestly, like both of them fit in the world. So yeah, Dragon Age to me is like, again, kind of getting with what I was talking about Fallout. There's definitely an expectation that game sets that I think other games like maybe Witcher 3 and other games have really delivered on. But you've come to expect certain levels of writing and world building and player agency, I guess, that when a game doesn't have that now, it feels like it's a lesser of an RPG experience. Because I've played Dragon Age now.
Yeah, it really depends on like what I'm looking for from the game. If I go in knowing that, say, it's a JRPG, so I don't expect much in terms of player choice or influencing the narrative, then I don't expect to get that from the game. But sometimes, like, I'll play, a Western RPG, and expect that kind of responsiveness from the game world to my choices, and then when I don't get it, it feels like I'm being shortchanged somehow.
Right, yeah. Like if I expect it and it delivers, great. If they do it half-assed, it's even worse, though. So like, I think that's always
like I almost not want to have that expectation going in.
Right, like that. Just tell me, hey,
So
you're not
I've
even
like
make
kind
a
of
voice in this game. Whatever happens is what happens. Have fun.
Yeah, like I've kind of polarized that way into, I want my choice and consequence games, and I want my JRPGs, and the kind of half-assed middle. Unless you're doing something really special like Nier Automata, I don't really care.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Right? When that Kingdom Come Deliverance game came out, I was like, it looks like it's going to walk that line. And that's almost the exact thought process I had was, well, I've played a Dragon Age and I played a Witcher, and what is this going to do? Something in between? I'm just not into it, So yeah, it's complicated. A game has to nail a lot of things these days, especially RPGs.
They're really hard to make. Yeah. And like it sounds weird now, like to talk about Dragon Age in these terms, but like we have to remember when Origins came out, fully 3D explorable party-based RPGs weren't a thing.
Right. Yeah.
Like Jade Empire kind of had some of that, and then you like it was kind of in the Knights of the Old Republic games, but like the full-on experience, like that melding of classic RPG gameplay with the 3D explorable worlds was like that's a Dragon Age thing.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting way they've moved the series forward, and they've done a lot of, even like the books are great. They've done a lot of cool stuff with like browser games and things to just kind of keep the story being told in different formats and stuff. And I'm optimistic. I mean, they've made mistakes, I think, and it's been well documented, BioWare, but I feel like they haven't fucked up Dragon Age just yet. So it's the one I'm really hoping they pulled together.
And like speaking as someone who didn't really like Dragon Age 2, I don't think they fucked it up beyond redemption. Right? I think I still trust them to make a good Dragon Age game when they have more than 11 months to make it.
Yeah, and they're not counting on, what do they call it? BioWare magic to put it all together in the end?
Yeah, BioWare magic. Yeah, it's fucked up how that studio was run for a very long time. And I hope that they've, pulled it together and can now make something worth playing.
Honestly, I mean, maybe it's a good thing that some of that shit got brought to light. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like maybe like by them saying, look, you can't make video games on hope, not genre defining multi-million-dollar studio make or break games on hope. And I'm betting that after reading that article, if not somebody at BioWare, somebody at EA said, look, you ain't doing this shit again, all right? There's no BioWare magic. Make the game the right way, like you had been, and don't just count on it to come together at the last second. 'Cause that's just a real foolish idea. I mean, I don't know how else to explain it. It's not like game making is new. I mean, people understand that there's accepted practices and stuff like that. So, I'm hoping that the next one is kind of a return to form, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, we know Dragon Age 4 is getting made. It's been it's kind of been like half
Yeah,
announced over and over and over again. It's never had like a big reveal. And that might be the best approach to take with it because like you don't want to do what you did with Anthem, which is show off this really
oh man,
cool mission that they never really made
yeah,
good
and
on.
everything in it looked so awesome, and it was, I mean, what do they call it? Bull shots? You know?
Yeah, it was very much a vertical slice that never really existed beyond that. Like that is not like the levels didn't have that amount of
Yeah, and they
verticality
also,
to them, right? Where you're like kind of jetpacking off a cliff through a
right.
jungle. It looked so
Yeah, the
cool.
world's like forming around you, and monsters are attacking each other, and like they did a lot to make that look like something that it really, really wasn't even close to being. That felt like kind of like almost like the combination of so many of BioWare's promises all in one game, and then it was not.
I mean, they nailed the shooting mechanics, and
Yeah,
that's about it.
yeah. The flying felt
Like,
great. There you go. That was past that.
I didn't even like the
Really?
flying, to be
Oh,
honest.
yeah.
I like my problem with the flying is that it's the fun part, but they restricted it so
Yeah,
much. Like you have to keep recharging your
yeah.
power, and it's just like, no, let me jetpack around all day long. What's the point of restricting my
And
ability
what's
to
really weird
fly?
is, I mean, other games, specifically Destiny, figured out, hey, if you want to go on your vehicle and ride all around, who cares? You know what I mean? It's not something that like makes or breaks the game. Nobody's fighting from their flying stance, so who cares? But yeah, they really limited you in such a weird way, and you're like, spend half the time you're flying looking for a little geyser so that you can keep flying, like because it's the fun thing to do. It's a lot of
Yeah,
weird choices in that game.
a lot of
Yeah.
missed potential with that game, I think. But hopefully Dragon Age 4 is good. So to close this out, the last game that influenced me, and this is going to be no surprise, is Super Mario
Mhm.
64.
Yeah.
And like, it sounds really ridiculous to say this now, but like back in 1996, it was 1996, right, when the game came
Okay.
out?
Yeah. Seems like it.
Yeah. Like, fully explorable 3D worlds weren't really a thing in console
Right.
games. Like, the whole idea of putting Mario in 3D was just revolutionary. Like, Nintendo had to develop an entire language of camera
Mhm.
placement for this kind of experience. Like they had like Lakitu following
That was
you
such a
around.
smart thing to do because it all of a sudden explained, like, not just like a story reason, but it also was like, oh, I have to move this camera thing so I can see my character a little bit better. I thought that was a really, really, really smart thing.
Yeah, and like just to like explain it to people. You're absolutely right. Something unfamiliar to them. I think it was a really clever solution. But this is also an odd game for me because I didn't really play it much growing up because I didn't own any consoles. I played a bit at like friends' houses, but I never really played the game to completion until I got to university and discovered emulation and less than legal ways of playing video
Oh, you're in
games.
college. It's all right. I think everybody understands.
I was in college, it's fine. For the purposes of our legal defense, I bought a. Let's say that I bought a cartridge and then downloaded a ROM as
Of
a
course.
backup, and that is fully within my rights. So
Yeah.
that's what I did. Um, but anyway, what I got from the game was almost like the promise of being able to run around these worlds and jump around. It was almost like I was influenced more by the promise of doing that than the game
Right.
itself. And when I actually got to play the game, I really liked it. I think surprisingly it holds up. Some camera issues aside, it still works pretty well as a game. And it got me interested in playing other 3D platformers. It's why I like Psychonauts today. It's why I really like To Hat in Time. It's because I am always interested in the promise of exploring these really stylized themed worlds. I think it also kind of plays into why I like theme parks now. Like, these are like the ludic equivalent of theme parks, almost. Like, going from these different themed levels, like, you know, you got your snow level, you got your circus level, you got your jungle level. Like, that's kind of how I think about exploring worlds now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Especially when, you know, I think for maybe a little bit, people were talking about theme park in a bad way when it comes to games, right? Like where you go on, you know, it shows you this cool thing. And I think Mario was great at that. And I think Mario has always been great at that. You know, oh, cool, look, a sand level. And what's different in a sand level? Oh, you can slide down this thing. Okay, cool. But you go moment to moment in Mario, and it's just such a fun experience to get somewhere new that, like, you know, sometimes people talk about exploration games, and I don't ever hear people talk about Mario, but like sometimes the world feels cooler than even whatever Mario's doing or getting or whatever you're doing. You just want to spend time and figure out all the little intricacies in it, you know? I think that was really smart how, in 3D especially, they introduced the player and they never really, I don't know, like, they never really felt like you were getting too far away from the basics, but just introducing things in very small segments. And that felt
like very incremental,
right.
The way it teaches you how to do stuff. And like, and this is something I think that even subsequent Mario games have done super well. Like, you can even see its DNA in Odyssey, where now they've kind of fully realized that theme park idea where you're a literal tourist going to these worlds. And now they're a lot more stylized. Like, the sand level is also kind of quasi Mexican Aztec themed, and you have and its denizens are like these really kind of cute characters that have their own little quirks. I think that's something they've done. They've managed to kind of bring that spirit forward as they've, you know, added more polygons and higher fidelity to the game. That's something I think that they've done really well with the Mario series, and that I think a lot of other 3D platformers don't necessarily succeed super well at. Like, I can go play, I don't know, what's the one I don't like? I don't know, Poi, or you know, like even like your Prince of Persia's, but they're doing something very different, right? But a lot of them don't have that same kind of feeling of discovering something cool and new, in a way that doesn't feel like dangerous.
Yeah.
Lack of a better word. So yeah, the influence to me has been wanting to play more of these kinds of games where you like explore but also interact in a meaningful, mechanically meaningful way.
I think with a lot of platformers, what you have to, like, what some of them struggle with is every stage needs to feel harder. The enemy's more difficult, the stage more, you know, scary or tough or whatever. And I don't ever really remember that being my thing with Mario. Like, it was like, when I would get to an area, it wasn't like, oh, this is the desert area, it's going to be real hard. It's like, no, it's a desert area. You know, it's going to have something new and cool, but like the game seemed to wanted you to go from place to place. It didn't want you to feel like getting to a new area was going to be like, oh, well, this is going to be way, way harder. No, it was pretty much the same difficulty the whole game through, you know?
Yeah, like Super Mario 64 has a bit of that because like TikTok Clock and Rainbow Ride are fucking hard, but you can always just go back and get more stars from the earlier levels, right? And then you don't really have to do much in those levels to complete the game. And that's kind of another thing that I look for now in games that Super Mario 64 did well, which is kind of designing your own difficulty.
Yeah.
And not in like adjusting a difficulty slider, but what challenges do I want to complete to achieve the goal?
Adaptive difficulty has been such a great thing in the past couple of years, where it's like when you load into a menu, it's like, well, what kind of combat do you want to experience? What kind of story, or just give me the story, just get me from point A to point B, and I don't care about the rest. You know, I really, really like that a lot of games are incorporating that type of difficulty now, where it's less about, hey, we're going to make the game hard this way. We're going to let you make the game hard another way. Even Assassin's Creed has that now. It says, what type of stealth difficulty versus what type of combat difficulty do you want? With both kind of being different, terms in Assassin's Creed, it makes sense. Like, well, I would rather have stealth be easy but combat be hard, if that makes sense. So adaptive difficulty though is such a cool new concept, and I'm glad to see that. Like, I think it did get its start in platformers because so many people want to experience Mario and not get frustrated, and I think designing around that is really, really smart.
And it's been influential, I think, to like every other 3D platformer now is like, here's the main stuff and here's the optional challenges. I think maybe only Psychonauts really deviates from that, where you just there's a critical path and not much. There is some side content, but it's really just here's the critical path and you have to complete it. But by and large, they've all kind of gone with this more collectathon. Here are these challenges, kind of thing that was pioneered by Super Mario 64 and then made its way into the rare platformers as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I look for in my platformers now, is stuff that makes me feel like a college kid trying to feel like an 8-year-old playing Mario.
That's some layers to it, yeah.
Yeah, it definitely layers in how we appreciate games. It's almost like 3 or 4 different layers of nostalgia all stacked on top of each other. And that's how I think of games.
And
now.
I think that part of it is kind of recognizing, hey, I like this because of nostalgia, but games these days may do this better, and not getting so trapped in that mindset. Because I do know a lot of people who can get that way, and it's frustrating to be like, there's been better games made since whatever you're talking about sometimes. So.
And like, it's not like the old games don't hold up. Sometimes I can still go back and play like OG Roller Coaster Tycoon and have a great time.
Like Deus Ex, those other games that we were talking about, like they almost all would hold up today, no matter what you wanted to do with them.
But like, I don't want to, like, I almost think of advances that the medium has made, not as necessarily improvements, but new features. Like, here's new cool stuff we can do. Like, I don't think of like better graphics necessarily as like
that was gonna
an improvement. I think of that as now we can show things on screen with higher fidelity, and that's a new cool feature that you can put in your game, and I really appreciate it. While still not like saying that the old stuff is just now that's butt ugly and I don't want to play it.
I think that especially what a lot of developers I've been noticing, or at least think I've been noticing, what they want to do is they want to capture that perfect medium, right? Of like, hey, this is nostalgia enough that you get this world and that you like this, and it's related enough to something you like. But here, the twist I'm going to give you is, in the modern sense, is almost always going to be something like adaptive difficulty, or something where, hey, the game respects your choices, or you can do things in this game that like allow you to branch out or experience the game differently.
Like think of something like Undertale, which is this like on its surface this very classic throwback to 16-bit JRPGs, but ends up being this completely different thing once you actually go through it.
And I think some of the smarter games they know that now, and that's what they want to do, is they want to take your expectations, run with them just enough so that you feel comfortable, and then it's all about, hey, how do we flip this now? How do we make you feel like what you're playing isn't like anything you've done before, even though it's rooted in stuff that you obviously have played before? So it's the best games do that well. They basically take that and run with it, and then you end up playing a game, you're like, wow, I didn't expect Undertale to do that at all, and now it's one of my favorite games almost,
that taking that sense of familiarity and not just like subverting it on purpose, but subverting it to an end.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
it.
Subversion isn't the goal, but we're taking what's familiar about it and then surprising you with something cool and deep itself.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's like the surprise is almost a different layer of enjoying the game. It's like, wow, this went to a place where, I thought I knew I was going to get. Now I'm blown away, and that's what a lot of people these days I think want, because there's so many games that they just walk that line of just being exactly what they said that we're going to be, and it's not very fun, when you're looking for something to be new or experience something different.
Yeah, like, and don't get me wrong, sometimes you just want that comfort food. Like, my favorite game so far this year is the new Ori game, and that's not a surprising game in any way. It's just a really good
Yeah,
game. But then, like, I'm playing the new, to bring it back kind of full circle, I'm playing the new Yakuza game now. And it's not just surprising because it's a JRPG where it previously was a
yeah,
brawler. It's surprising because, like, it's telling its story, or it's telling a new kind of story in the setting that I'm familiar with. And that to me is it like elevates the game that
yeah,
much more.
yeah. That the expectation being subverted, I think, is something that the better studios, they know who their audience is and what they expect, and then they flip it on their head just enough. If you go too crazy with it, sometimes
They
you end up with, you know, really damaging what people wanted in general. So I think the best studios know that, and
it's like
yeah,
yeah, it's like giving them something. It's giving your audience something that they didn't know
yeah,
that they
there you
wanted,
go.
rooted in something that they knew they
Right.
wanted. And like, and again, it's not about just subverting for the sake of subverting. It's subverting to do something
Yeah,
cool.
yeah,
And that's like you rightfully point out, the best games can do
yeah.
that.
I'm with you. That was a good examination. I think explains a lot, kind of just in general, like how we approach games and what we look for and things that we know we like.
Yeah, I'm really glad we got to do this episode. And for our listeners, if you'd like to keep up to date with the podcast, please follow us on our website at avocadogamescast.wordpress.com, where we post each episode along with a link dump to fact check or provide you with resources for the stuff that we talked about. And you can also, I have words. You can also subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts. Just search for Avocado Gamescast. And please make sure you check out the community that spawned this podcast at the-avocado.org. That is the Avocado. We talk about video games, but also movies and music and politics and a whole bunch of other cool stuff. So please check us out.
All right. Good episode.
All right.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
Thanks for listening to us.